Ja, hej och hjärtligt välkomna till Moderna Museet. This program today will be in English, so I will continue the program in English. Very welcome to Moderna Museet here in Stockholm to the opening day of the exhibition The House of Nisabas. And today we have a program, Meet the Artists of House of Nisabas. And we're going to have artist talks throughout the day here with 16 of the participating artists in the exhibition. So we'll have a break for lunch, and you at home can follow us on both YouTube and Facebook throughout the day. And the program will also be accessible on YouTube after this transmission. So with that, I'm very pleased to hand over to the first panel of the day, and the curator and today's moderator, Hendrik Folkerts. Please.
Thank you, Ulf, for that lovely introduction, and welcome everyone to actually the first opening day of the exhibition, which is on our left side here, House of Nisabas. Can you hear me okay, by the way? So, maybe a little bit louder then, I would say. That's what I thought. Maybe now it's a little bit better? Fantastic, good. Yeah, welcome to the first opening day of House of Nisabas. Where we dive into sort of the painting histories of the last 15 years. So I use that word sort of ironically almost, because we are in the middle of it. The exhibition really wants to take a deep dive into what type of language sort of artists are using at this moment, visual, symbolic sort of language actually in the work that they make, and that will be very much one of the focuses of the sort of talks that we're doing this morning and this sort of afternoon, to understand ways of working, to understand ways of building language, to understand ways of building a sort of image in a world where sort of the sort of image is subjected to so much fracture and sort of a fragmentation at the moment. We're going to very much also focus on the works that are in the sort of exhibition, and I'm very pleased to welcome to our little low stage here, which I like, Cinga Samson on my far left here. Welcome, Jill. Mulleady in the middle here. Jill, Cinga, welcome both. I'm so happy you are here. And maybe Jill, I'm going to start with you. Your work, which is magnificent, is displayed kind of at the heart of the sort of exhibition, and it's called The Shift, and it's a monumental work. We'll talk about a few facets of it, but maybe we'll start with the shift, actually. What for you has been shifting in that work, actually?
Hello, I'm testing. It's on now. Yes, I think so.
Yes.
Hello. Yes. Hi. So yes, very nice to be here with you this morning, and to open this show together, and be with all the artists that actually fly from everywhere, and it's like a very beautiful gathering. So the shift, it's a collaboration piece somehow, because we talked about doing a work that would be at the heart of the space, but just as a sort of, we talk about the ceiling, so it was like an architectural response to the space in collaboration with Forma Fantasma, and we immediately thought about making a work that would reach the ceiling and would be as a sort of a column vertebral, how you say, like a spine. And in a way I thought about the verticality of the work would bring some, because of the verticality, I wanted to bring some spiritual aspect on it, and the shift is exactly that shift, what I was depicting. It was the character that is lying on the ground is actually exhaling its last breath of life and inhaling the first breath of death. So it's the shift from life to death, but it's really like a moment that it's not one moment or the other one. It's in the in-between moment that happens only once, but it's also all the time present during life. So it's actually really like not here, not there, but it represents a wholeness.
And what I find so sort of remarkable about this shift is made sort of visual and sort of a compositional aspect to that is we see this figure kind of like lying on the kind of lower part of the work. It's a very sort of ambiguous figure, actually, sleeping, sort of dreaming, shifting in many different ways. And then sort of above this figure is this sort of assembly of other figures, possible sort of a protagonist in one's life even, really sort of dozens of faces and sort of figures in many ways, and sort of at the top of this work, which is almost like 4 meters high, of course, so it's 4.5 meters high, we see this like celestial kind of scape almost. And I'm sort of curious, I mean, this figure is anchored in an experience that you've had, but also has sort of a literary sort of ancestry for you. But then all these other figures that kind of like float above this, how did you kind of build that, almost sort of language of figures above this main figure?
So it really came from a personal experience related to someone very close to mine that died, and so it was, and then I had this experience of death, and I thought about this. Lavoisier, he says, nothing is gained in life, nothing is lost, everything is transformed. And I actually, that life that I saw going, I wanted to transform it. So I transformed it in a painting. And we had this premise that was the formal aspect, but then the whole painting would actually mean to revisit this experience. And it's very hard to describe it because it's what I've seen when this person passed away, that we saw all this presence surrounded, the love of the family, but also the ancestors visiting, and the past and the future. And when I asked my daughter, do you think these characters, she's 13, and she's very affected view about art history or...
No bullshit with her.
No bullshit. I was like, do you think these people are from the past? And she was like, no, they're from the future. But for me, they were for the past somehow.
Yeah. No, and this sort of collapse of time is then felt in this work because it holds a different space. I think also when you stand in front of it, and one of the sort of effects, or one of the aspects of that sort of effect is that you made this work on velvet. It's sort of oil on velvet. So it really has this very luminous, almost sumptuous desire from us that it shines. It comes sort of towards us, and it sort of absorbs light, and it absorbs many different things sort of around it. Have you made work on velvet before? Is this the first time?
Yeah, I've been working on velvet for the last year, and it's the velvet absorbs a lot the oil, so it's not, they're sort of oil and water. It's not very compatible, but like through layering, you manage to actually keep the gesture out. And I'm experimenting actually.
How, I mean, you're sort of experimenting in a magnificent, monumental way with this. How did it feel to actually like make such a monumental work on sort of a material that you are still experimenting with?
A physical challenge, yes. Yeah, because the painting didn't fit my studio, so I actually only saw it all together here in the museum. It left my studio in panels, and yeah.
Incredible. I'm going to make a little bit of a sort of a bridge to you, Cinga, because this sort of conversation on sort of a time and sort of the multitude of temporalities, perhaps past, sort of a present, future, is in a way something I'm experiencing when I'm standing in front of your work as well, because so much sort of a time is held in the moment that you sort of represent. And what I mean with that is I go back to something that you said when I visited you in December in South Africa. You said, I want to sort of paint the fullness of life. And I thought that was such an extraordinary thing to say, because that fullness is felt, not just in sort of the detail of your work, which is sort of enormous and sort of meticulous in many different ways, but also in And I do think about sort of Impressionism, and I do think about certain moments in sort of art history where time was also trying to be held in a moment, right? And so I am sort of curious to hear you speak a little bit more about that fullness of life that you want to hold in your work. If you could talk a little bit more about that.
Thank you, Hendrik, for your invite, and the museum, Moderna Museum, for hosting us, and the wonderful artists that we have shared the space together to make this exhibition, and also to everyone who has came to another exhibition. Maybe I should explain a little bit, give a little bit of a background to the work, and also to and just give a little bit what some of the symbols mean to where I'm from.
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
The work is titled Emthonjeni, which in translation in English would be by the spring. The springs, the rivers, the ocean, secret places, according to the Xhosas, which I am a Xhosa, the Ngunis in the southern Africa. And these are places where when you have at times gone so wrong in life, we can, as a community, go and give you a bath so that you can come back to yourself. But also, it's not just that. There's also a belief that these are also potholes where you can go and talk to your ancestors who have passed away, and also to some of the beings, universal beings. So it's also believed that when you go at a certain time or specific times, like in the morning, very early in the morning, while it's still misty, and or at night, you might have the privilege to see them, and it's believed it's the whole world. It's believed that they do come out. The people, we believe that there's people who live underwater, which these are the ancestors and all these beings. They do come out, and but it's a very rare thing to experience. So there is really a sense of time in the painting that it's sort of in a way you in this realm managing to connect to those who have passed, which somehow it just connects to what you were with your work in a way, Jill. So it does have that sort of dynamicness in it, where it feels as if it's slightly morning, but also seeing the stars in it. It's misty. It also feels at night. Also feels that it's like it's the morning. So there is that sort of crossing of time where you are in this time, but talking to those who have passed away. Yeah.
Exactly, and I mean this is such a beautiful link, of course, that when we stand in front of both of your works, we are looking at thresholds of various kinds, right? Sort of the passages, the shifts, the spring, like this sort of the possibility of meeting those sort of who have come sort of before us and sort of after at the same time, and in both of your works, but Cinga, I'm going to focus a little bit longer on your work, and you've said it already. There are certain signs and symbols in your work, right? And it's extremely rich, and the meaning of which is sometimes held sort of ambiguous. For instance, at the center of the work, there is this sort of mysterious shell with a snake, a small snake wrapped sort of around it. There's this sort of a presence of sort of birds and of dogs, and there's this sort of objects in the water that kind of flow with the water. It's a sort of general sort of a question, and it's one of the sort of questions that have led this exhibition. How important is it to you as an artist that people have a sort of an analytical understanding of these signs, or do you see them more as sort of making a spiritual or sort of emotional affect in the work? So meaning versus sort of impact in a way. I'm curious how you relate to that as an artist, to your viewer in a way.
Yes, I did know that the work would leave the studio, and some of these understandings and thinkings, would not necessarily be shared. So I wanted to make a work that is generous, that allows all sort of possibilities. Because by the spring, you sort of coming to meeting another world. Like I said, it's a pothole. You're meeting another world where at times you can. They say it's believed that sometimes the cows, if you can see the cows from under the water coming out. So there's all these possibilities of another world that you may not have experienced. But as a picture, as someone who looks at the picture without all that background, I really wanted a work that I wanted to create a work that each and every individual can, if they manage to connect with it, it can allow them to transport them in their own thinking, in their own depth, and through these symbols that are there, can allow their own imagination to sort of flow and make meaning that is really relevant to their own experiences and their own lives.
Absolutely, and I think one key aspect in the work that sort of brings us to that space is the fact that, and you have worked like this for as long as I know, that the figures in your work, they're sort of eyes, they are sort of left white. They are sort of open in a way, both ways, right? It goes both ways somehow. Like we cannot sort of quite look into their eyes, and sort of vice versa. So I think that signal already kind of puts us or me as sort of a viewer in a space that, okay, something is happening in this work that sort of brings me to another sphere somehow. I think that's a very powerful way. How did you sort of arrive at this thing that you have been using sort of frequently in your work of leaving the eyes open?
It's a very funny story. Even so, earlier on, when I was starting to work, to practice, I had challenges with the eyes to do the pupils more specifically, because I always felt that they center, when you look at the work, they sort of direct to you. But I didn't want that in the work. I wanted a work that that sort of each and every moment is as important as the figures. So if the figures have eyes, I sort of felt that they'll be heavy, and they will make the figure human. So I wanted to take that aspect away, because I really wanted the magic of the wall painting to exist, and also to disappoint, that you are looking at a you go to the work thinking that you're looking at a human being, but the eyes sort of repel that understanding. So for me, that collapse was very important. So earlier on, to the story I was trying to say, earlier on when I was working, I had that challenge of doing the pupils. So on one painting, while I was still thinking about the pupils, I done the whole painting, but I was thinking about do I do these pupils, do I not? So I walked out of my studio. It was an open studio, and then another artist came in who had a mental challenges. He took a marker and drew, and sort of drew the pupils in the painting. So when I came back, I asked who did this, because it was so disrespectful for me, and I was with among other artists. So this is like you can't touch another artist's work, Then we understood, it was Aja. The name of the artist was Andile, so we called him Aja. It was Aja. Aja came in earlier on. He's the one who drew them. So with me being upset, I sort of like, what? I just gave up, doing the pupils, and I thought it was a mistake, a big mistake, and I can't do this anymore. So it was very challenging and very painful for me to allow to get to that point. But what surprised me, it ended up being a feature in the paintings that really sparks a lot of curiosity. Later on, I realized that what I was trying to get to is this thing that I wanted a painting that to make paintings that allow the viewer to look at everything, which I was also the viewer. When I stand back from the painting, then I also became the viewer of the work.
And that fullness that is felt, just to come back to that word.
Yeah.
Jill, I just, now that we're speaking about certain signs sort of in the work that sort of bring us to a more spiritual, otherworldly sort of factor in it, something that we've talked about a lot actually is sort of the glows in your work and sort of the green light. This is something that you have been using also a lot. And if you look at your work of many years actually, there is always a sort of disjunction between, you're looking at a scene that is sort of recognizable, but you immediately sense that it takes place in and on a different sort of a plane than ours more often than not. And so with your eyes being the signal of that, what type of sort of methods do you use to bring your viewer to this other space? I mean, sort of the glow being one of them, I think.
It's really intuitive. Have no plan ahead, and I don't even do it on purpose. I don't think I'm planning to bring things into another sort of intangible aspect, but I am attracted, and I've always been attracted through the invisible. And I think it's kind of like an aspiration to reach that invisible level through the medium of painting, which is the one I actually managed the best. I tried earlier with music, and I wanted to be a pianist, which is also like a way to reach this intangible level, which was classic music at the beginning. And there's some colors that really weirdly they approach that. So green is a color that is really not so easy to handle. There's all these different shades of green in painting, but when it hits the spot, it actually goes somewhere. And there's something about light also that I'm very interested in. And this is something that is not at all. It's like a classic. It's like when chiaroscuro appeared, and why we love Caravaggio. It's because of the light. It's the way how, it's the use of light that actually we are. It's how life is projected in a face, for example. So this is not about a face. It's about the connection with being alive, with the sun, with the source of light, with the candle, and what this represents. So it's about the emotion that the reflection of light brings into the viewer at the end of the day, because that's the one who carries the torch, the viewer.
And just to hook into a little bit this desire or this sort of interest in the sort of non-visible or the sort of invisible, within a European art history of this type of work, it sort of stands sort of antithetical to a lot of history of sort of the painting medium, which is always especially from sort of a Renaissance era on, has been seen to make the world visible, right? Sort of this window sort of the world, this sort of representational space. And, this has been many different sort of pathways into that over many centuries. But I'm interested in this moment and you saying like, oh no, I actually use this medium to sort of get to an invisibility actually. Can you maybe talk a little bit more about that?
Again, it's about going into places that are not obvious somehow. Like we are totally overwhelmed by images at the moment. It's like we're really living in a moment where we're overwhelmed by images, and the invisible are not the ones that can be created by. It's like for me, it's like, okay, we have the postmodernism where it was about bringing everything that is visible together, but I'm thinking about actually like, okay, what's actually not so obvious now, and what can't be made in an artificial way, and what can be made in a human way. So that's like the mystery. Yeah.
And I mean, you're touching upon a very core aspect of this sort of exhibition, this sort of inundation of sort of images right now, and how you as an artist sort of not just sort of relate to that, but build images in, right? Sort of, do you relate to also the fracture almost of sort of images and sort of information that sort of exists in the world right now? Because in a way, you're also kind of, your work has so many layers of how sort of images are built, of course. So there's on the one hand a desire to sort of be sort of distinct from how information acts and responds at this world to make something distinctly human, right? And to make something sort of towards sort of invisible factors that cannot be sort of reproduced so easily. And on the other hand, you are an actor in the world where the sort of image has sort of fractured, and not reproducing that sort of a fracture per se, but living in that fracture by layering sort of an sort of image. Do you feel that? Do you recognize yourself in what I say in that sense of that double relationship to image?
100%, and I thought about it this morning, and I think we all live like there's the fact that we can just like steal and like second-hand everything, like we can use everything. It makes us doubt of our originality. I thought about like maybe we're all imposters because we can just create things. Anyone has like the capacity to make anything now, and it is a contradiction. It is a contradiction that I do it, and because I was born in 1980, and I am part of this. It's like, again, I'm part of postmodernism, and this is how I learned how to make images, by like just stealing, copying, looking, it's always aspirational, like how can we put everything together and make something new? But it's not enough. It's not enough, and like that's why you have to always have actually the injection of like real life, like the experience of life. We cannot stop living in it's about truth at the end of the day, that we see when something is truthful or not.
Yeah. That's an interesting word, which is a word that you use quite a lot as well, to capture a certain sort of a true thing in sort of the painting. Can you, as a final note perhaps, talk about what is sort of a true for you in that sense when you sort of paint?
When I make works, my mind, it's like the point where I'm creating from is is a point where I understand that paintings are a little bit more an exaggeration of the things. There's no flying shell. That is a bit exaggerated. That is a bit extra. So it's something that for me that there's no real, for me, there's no truth in it. It's the individual that looks at the work that creates their own
vision of it almost.
Yes, their own truth in the work, and then in that way, sort of the work then gets completed. It's more like I see it as a painting. I see it as a way to arrive in your own depth, in your own truths, which I don't know each person's experience and truth. So at the word through, I think for me it's something that depends to each and every individual, what's true for them in the work. But I think my role as an artist is to be able to create these things that act almost like a device that allows whoever is looking at the work to reach their own truth, which maybe it might be challenging when you are by yourself without looking at the work. Like when you're looking at a painting that you have no background of, you sort of have this overwhelming feeling that that you go through yourself, but you don't know what was the story or the history behind. But you're so captured by the beauty and the incredibleness of the work. So it sort of transports you to different layers of your psyche in your way. So I think for me it really depends on individuals. To some, I've heard somebody earlier on say, not here, but earlier on in years, walking into an exhibition, and someone they didn't know was an artist. So when they were leaving, they were upset. It was my exhibition, they were leaving, and they were saying, this is not intelligent, So for that individual, I realized there's nothing for them. Even though there's all these works, but there was nothing for them in all. The something was the anger or the being provoked. So that became their own truth. So to me, it's something very fluid. The truth in an artwork.
Thank you, Cinga. Thank you. I'm going to end here and thank you both.
Thank you,
not just for what we just did on stage, but for the last 1.5 years of speaking about work, which has led
1.5 years.
Yeah, something like that. 1.5, 2 years. It's when it all started. For sort of the dialogue that has led also in many ways to this extraordinary work, which, again, I want to sort of repeat that sort of a sentence that puts us on like sort of a threshold as we stand in front of it. And that is such a wonderful link between both of your work. So I thank you, Jill, Cinga. Please give them a warm applause. We are continuing with Martin Gustavsson, Alex Cerveny, and Hortensia Kafchin, who will join me on stage presently. In the meantime, just to say that we will be here most of the afternoon, and I hope that you can stay with us, of course, but also if you want to peek into the exhibition after kind of hearing the sort of artists speak, absolutely feel free. The exhibition is open. Martin, do you want to sit next to me? I think we need an extra chair as well, Ulf. Yes. I think we need an extra chair as well. That's great, thank you.
You're
using the handheld? Okay, great.
No, just
And then Hortensia, you're fully mic'd up in Madonna, Britney, Ariana gear. That's very nice. Alex, you too. Thank you for joining me, and thank you for being part of this exhibition. Alex Cerveny, Hortensia Kafchin, Martin Gustavsson. I'm going to maybe take it from right to left. Martin, and I'm going to start with you. Your work, which we have been also in sort of dialogue about for like quite some time, is called Bacchus. And it is very sort of clearly, as you sort of approach it, it registers almost sort of immediately as this like bacchanalian scene, because it revels in sort of the excess of that. And so I want to talk to you about sort of excess, of course, but I also want to talk to you about how that sort of excess finds its way into your work, not just like thematically, let's say, or in relationship to finding form for sort of queer experiences that I know that you're very sort of interested in, but also quite frankly on like a formal level, because the richness of sort of the paint and how it flows on the work, has extreme specificity in how you work. So maybe we start there, and I'm going to sort of invite you to talk about a word which is a sort of a coadulation. Coadulation as a method that I think you have sort of applied formally for quite some time, but that finds a beautiful form in the work Bacchus.
Thank you. Yes, so for quite some time I've been very interested to find a way to make paintings move. So to have like a painting that actually moves. And earlier on, I would do all sorts of things. I would carry them around, or I would put wheels on them, and I'd get dancers to dance with them and all sorts of things. But it didn't quite do it. So I was thinking, how can I make the painting seem as though it moves, but it's still, and we have to move with it. So that was the basic for that. And so I wanted it to be like a moment of extreme fluidity, so that we, the painting goes in and out of some sort of stability, and make it as unstable as possible. So if the paint completely moves the whole time, then is it possible to have a moment when it seems like there's nothing, and after a while there's something? So that's basically it. And then I work with, so I think we all suffer, many artists suffer from this thing of wanting to make precise incisions that will stay and that they will hold time. I feel now that they don't hold time for me, so I need to be fluid. It needs to move the whole time. Yeah.
And just to return to that word, to coagulate something. Would you mind sort of unpacking that a bit?
Something, I mean, it also comes from the fact that I'm now doing a PhD, so I'm also writing about the paintings that I make, which has sort of deepened the understanding of what I'm doing. And so I'm looking and searching for words that can somehow hold some of this fluidity, and to coagulate. Blood coagulates, other substances can coagulate and take a form which then can leave somehow. You know, where you can put water on it and then it starts to move again. So that's where I want to be.
And how does that kind of intersect with your sort of a choice in this work, but also sort of an interest into pairing that with this mythological scene, this bacchanalian scene that you make?
Yeah, I mean, the PhD that I'm working on is called Faggoty Brushstrokes in Motion. So I'm looking at ways, how does a brushstroke become faggoty? I mean, is there a specificity about a brushstroke that you can say, well, actually, that has this quality of faggotry, right? So I'm very interested in finding historical material where I recognize this faggoty moment, and then I take that moment and then I do something with it. So in this case, I put color on it. I've worked in this way quite a lot. So I think a faggoty way of working is also appropriation. It's to do with imitating. It's to do with copying and miming and being somebody else. So I'm using all of those words in order to revisit historical sites, let's say, to make them differ.
Maybe just to hook into that, this research that you're doing now, both into your own work, but also into a history of understanding how the faggoty sort of brushstroke, but also sort of queer motifs have substantiated. I mean, I've also lived under the, not just sort of impression, but under the philosophy almost that sort of queerness is also by definition sort of an elusive thing, right? And it exists by nature sort of in that way somehow. So there is sort of a contradiction here, sort of potentially, right? That there is sort of a commitment to sort of a fluidity and a sort of elusiveness of something and a desire to recognize it on sort of an analytical level as you're doing in your own work and other works. How do you navigate that potential paradox, let's say?
Well, the paradox has to exist, and without it, there would be no point in writing about it. I mean, that is what makes it interesting. If we knew, if you could pinpoint every detail which potentially is faggoty, then it would lose interest somehow. So it's the fact that it is fluid, that it can coagulate and then be made to disappear, and you can look at that disappearance. I think that's the interest for me.
Thank you. And Alex, I'm going to make a jump to you now, if that's okay. Welcome on stage as well. Thank you for being here. Because, I mean, your work is sort of a camouflage, among many other things, I find. You know, when you first sort of approach it, it reads, or it sort of registers and sort of presents itself as sort of a cosmology, as sort of almost sort of medieval manuscript type of sort of image with like 3 circles in the way that the figures are sort of represented. It's sort of a view of the world in this sort of cosmology. But then you look sort of closer, and in the language, there's so much language in your work, it starts to kind of take us to a radically different space, actually. And I would argue, and please expand on that, of course, if you think that's okay or not, into a more sort of queer space, actually. And so I'm curious, this sort of presenting as one thing, leading into like another thing, how you, kind of build that language for yourself.
Oh, come on.
I know it's early in the morning, sorry.
So, Nisabas, please help me.
Some energy.
Well, you know, what can I say is this, you know, this Middle Age language is always present in my work. But what I can really say, I hate emptiness. I hate, you know, the emptiness, the silence, this thing. So I have to fill up all the spaces to calm down, you know, to calm me down. And then I always compare myself with this character, Sherazade, you know, from the Arabian Nights. You know, I have to tell non-stop, tell stories, you know, telling stories, just to keep myself alive. And then it's a everyday practice, you know. So this painting was very special for me, you know, because was not a kind of commission. When there's a commission for an institution, usually they ask for a RAF, you know, a drawing, a project. But you gave us freedom, you know. This was amazing, you know, to do what you want, the way you do, you know, the way you like. And so for me was a very intense and long and daily exercise to wake up, to stand in front of the canvas and wait for revelations, for languages, you know. And then I guess because I'm not a religious person, but art or be an artist is this, it's kind of a being a priest or being this, waiting for this revelations and sense for life.
And I'm going to take a step back in time because, I mean, your history of an artist is also very tied to a history of sort of drawing and sort of illustration. So I was wondering, like, that history is sort of recognizable in your work, and how sort of close that history is still with you. I'm just, it's a very open sort of a question to invite you to speak a little bit about how you sort of arrived at this form.
Well, since the beginning, I was interested in this, and then I became an illustrator because of this. People, friends, editors in the newspapers and magazines, they start to calling me to help them because they knew I was able to draw figures and represent the stories. But I began as an artist, this way. But at that moment, art was going to another direction, and I was a bit lost, because I was not interested in this. I was not interested in discuss the art world inside, like what is painting, the questions of painting, the questions of colors. I was living my life, and it was not easy. Was not easy in the late 80s and 90s to deal about sexuality. The HIV question, was desperate, was horrible, to at that time. So this was the questions for me, and my work was a escape, was a place that I was interested in this, in just to relax and to do things freely, and not. So I was also a bit outsider in the place where I live in São Paulo in Brazil. The art scene is very connected to the mainstream. So a lot of conceptual art, concrete art, and then all these connections with the cosmopolitan thinkness of art. But I was a bit doing things by my own.
Do you feel that in your own city, in your own space, or in sort of an art world sort of at large, has that shifted for you? That feeling of, being an outsider and doing a certain thing that may not always get sort of the recognizability that it should, and that I hope it has now, of course. But how has that shifted you? Because we are living in a different world, also in many ways not. Sort of Hortensia, we will get to that for sure in your work. But I'm sort of curious as to maybe both of your sort of experience as well, because you also share that experience, I think, a little bit of making work that wasn't always getting not just sort of acknowledgement, but sort of an understanding, let's say, on sort of a profound level.
That's more.
Yeah, yeah. How those shifts, perhaps, and how you've experienced those.
Well, it's amazing. Thanks to Nisaba. It's suddenly this, I was just watching, but then I realized this, the art world, the curators, they start to make questions, uncomfortable questions, is this? This is all about, this. Where's the peripheric artists? Where are the other artists, the other languages, and to fill up, the blank spaces. And then I guess this came to me, and then well, it's for me, I guess. So I was doing my things on paper, etchings and drawings, and so, and doing my market and then I decided to start to paint, to do paintings, and it was not easy, because people, they told me, no, this is not painting, you're drawing over the canvas, this is wrong, because painting was something different. Until There was this, there was one painting was sold by someone from Fondation Cartier in Paris. And then finally, I was invited to take part of a show. The show was Nous les Arbres in Paris. And suddenly my work was visible, in a different context outside of my place. And this changed it completely, I guess but that moment was not only for me, was changing for many other artists. Yep.
Exactly. Yeah. Martin, do you want to add words to that, or shall
I say yes.
Yes, indeed. Hortensia, I am excited to talk about your work. When I stand in front of it, which is a mighty experience, I have to say, I see on the one hand like a view of the world, right? You kind of like look at the world and you kind of understand, I think, very sort of profoundly which mechanisms are at sort of a play at the moment that cause the world to sort of turn to a darker sort of a place. And we can talk about it and we can sort of unpack that. But I also see an interest and sort of a dedication to understand a flow of sort of images that come through this and that cause some of that sort of a turn somehow, because one of the main sort of motifs in your 4.5 meter tall work, which is a monumental work, of course, is this river that forms the kind of flow of sort of images in which this almost like science fiction type of figure flows through an artificial sort of intelligence made up of 0 and 1s, flows through this river of sort of pornographic images, and what it flows to is this scene where we see sort of religious leaders and sort of the political leaders, burning people at the stake for the sake of the sort of economy. So basically, you're getting very real in this in this work, but you also sort of remain sort of committed to your interest in science fiction, in mysticism, in other motifs that come and play a role. So, I mean, you've worked on this work for a very long time. I know this because we were sort of in touch about it for so long. How did you start to build this image? Maybe that's a good point to start.
Okay, so this image was built I started to build this image long time ago, I think, since I was born somehow. Everything was already decided in the ancestral space, I think. But regarding this work, this composition, because in painting we have this eternal question. It's a conflict between the subject and the medium. And somehow the medium is poetry, because it's flowy. You have to align your neurons to fire up in order to have this flow and universal sensation of understanding. But in our case, I really used my frontal cortex, and I exploited my fears and my situation and my Romanian background and education and religion, Orthodox, childhood full of religious painting, religious summer camps. And this everything somehow is helping me a lot in art and painting and craft, but also is sabotaging me hardcore in my queer life, like exploding, blooming, let's say how we say as a trance or whatever, to bloom. But blooming, in order to bloom, you have to demolish all your, all your guidelines that they were installed by not only the religion itself, by dogma, but the society and yourself. So actually, before any transphobia or homophobia or aggressivity from outside, I think the first enemy, my first enemy, I'm my first enemy. And I negotiate with myself, the religious part of my brain. Come on, please, I want to have fun, I want to date, no, it's just, against the nature. How do you take hormones? God, you play with the divine machine of God. Are you crazy? You're a temple. You should, spread the genes out there and do stuff. And so this is a huge conflict, I think, as a queer person, because I personally have this guilt, more or less, towards the nature, towards Gaia. But beyond that, we have the big problem outside of ourselves. Let's say, okay, we survive ourselves, but after that we go outside to have fun. And we go outside to have fun. There is a war going on, and inflation, and people are struggling, and not necessarily that they're struggling, but I think it's a constant humiliation. It's like we are treated like kids by other people, giving laws and creating the economic system. But I know in laws and rules the real freedom exists. But come on. And this painting is made with in my case, with the Orthodox Church, because I'm Orthodox, and it's fair to attack what you more or less understand. And because I understand that world, and also with the Russian Church and Romanian and the whole network, the whole function. They are constantly. It's interesting that I never saw in my life a priest attacking the real problems, like being manic about domestic violence, abuse, exploitation. No, they only like the river of porn. The river of porn takes the shape of the S because basically it's the dollar. And if you go some step back, you will see that the two axes, like the priest and with the politician and the people on the stake, they create the two lines, so we have the big dollar. So in the end, everything happens on a motherboard. The motherboard, and our reality actually happens on the motherboard, because if you look at classic painting, you see a lot of, they're on the ground, they're on the grass, on the ship, whatever, in the throne room, in the different ruins. But now our reality moved totally on the motherboard. It's incredible. And all those events, they're a classic shenanigans of gaslighting, because politicians know, everybody knows. It's like the North Korea leader that was educated in Switzerland, and he went back and he's doing mayhem there. Come on, you know everything. You read all those things about democracy, things, a little bit of history, but no, they go on like that. So. Yeah.
Thank you for that fabulous explanation indeed. Very good. In addition to all the sort of elements that we just heard you speak about, you've sort of chosen quite a specific form actually for this work, not just in terms of its sort of monumentality, it's very sort of tall, but also it's on a rope. And it hangs on this rope as like a banner almost, or some kind of banner sort of device. Could you talk about that form? Because I find it really stands out in this sort of exhibition as, okay, it lives on the wall, as many works do, of course, but in a very different way. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Of course. I mean, speaking about the economy, and we try fixing the economy, the decision is made by economic, judgment. I wanted to find a solution where we don't have to move an entire complex, because on those sides, if we would frame it, it would be like very costly. And I tried to cut corners, but not because I was asked to. I wanted to be efficient, and I love, the medieval carpets and medieval vibe and everything. And I thought that, oh my God, that is a perfect solution. Basically, why canvases are stretched necessarily? We can just make them roll, and it can be sent easily, and it's much more chic, it's much more outstanding, Everybody's on frame, everything, but it's like with the rope, and it's quite interesting. I was really nervous because I had to engineer everything, and I, with the contractions and woods and fibers, how I put them, it was like, but low key, it's cool.
Totally. And this, I mean, sorry, as you were talking, one image actually sort of popped into my mind because we were in touch a lot on sort of a WhatsApp, of course, and you sent me sort of updates of the work, and you were working on the floor, actually, right? Because it's such a tall work that it could not exist on the wall in many different ways. So the work was made lying flat somehow. And Martin, I also have to think a little bit about your work, because if you talk about like sort of fluidity and sort of the paint moving, I know that you often work on the wall. So you're fighting sort of a gravity in very different ways somehow, I think. Has there ever been a desire for you actually to kind of like make work lying flat, and how that works? And you have done this as well.
Yeah, I mean, this one is.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I wanted to sort of clarify. I wasn't 100% sure.
No, it starts on the floor.
Okay.
And I think it's, for me, it's been, you know, I used to work with something which is in painting language is called imprimatur, which is you have a white surface and then you put one color down, and then you put other colors in relation to that color to make it do what you want it to do. So it can be like different colors, they work. It's an emotional game, I would say. So you put one color next to this first color, and then you start building up a story of color. So maybe it's actually that process is not so much to do with figuration, but more like an emotional transportation. Yeah.
No, exactly. And this emotional sort of a transportation, which was something that we talked about with sort of Jill and sort of Cinga as well. Do you kind of like find this more sort of a transcendental kind of aspect of your work important, intriguing, inviting in that sense?
Yes. I think that color is carrying emotion, for sure. I mean, it's very fun to paint. I enjoy myself enormously. And the colors become friends, and the colors also take on personalities almost. So it's a language of playing with these different identities and those different colors that I perceive them as being. And then they start mixing, and then you get something going. Yeah.
No, and I mean, Hortensia and sort of Martin, I want to kind of like maybe say something about your work in relationship to each other, because your works are actually facing each other in the sort of exhibition, which I think is a very sort of beautiful sort of dialogue that is happening sort of across this space, because there is this moment of staring into sort of an abyss. Let me just give that like a little bit of space. I mean, just in the way that you talk about, I mean, you add so many sort of motifs and so many layers of meaning, that really sort of carry us into also like a dark moment, actually, you know. But you hold us there for quite some time, and sort of offer sort of a release by adding elements that have sort of a more sort of a comical or mystical. I mean, you know how to do that really well, sort of in the way that you speak as well. Martin, I mean, in your work, it figures a little bit more like formally almost, because you have sort of dissected sort of the picture plane in different sections almost, where there is a sort of bacchanalian scene that is, again, sort of excessive and abundant and so rich in sort of the color and everything that you've spoken about. But then there are these kind of banners that kind of split up sort of the canvas, which are much darker actually, and you stare to the sort of cracks of the bacchanalian scene to see something else. So this notion of sort of this sort of abyss and like staring into it, I would invite you to talk a little bit about that and what that means to you.
Yeah, I mean, can I just say that I share, without you knowing, I share this kind of extreme religious upbringing. So I grew up in which is unusual in Sweden, but I grew up in a very extreme Protestant Lutheran society, where the question really was to begin with, as realizing you're a queer person, how do I survive, right? And I think you feel that too. So that's a kind of beginning of, you have to first survive, and then you can work out how to deal with that. And I think that for me, it's to have this narrative has been extremely important. And now when I'm writing, I can start to lose a bit of that narrative and let the paint itself do that. And then, but then you need the darkness. You need that chasm which opens up and has always opened up. That needs to be part of the painting.
Darkness.
Darkness, of course, is surrounding us. But until then, regarding my when I worked working in my knees, and it wasn't like I didn't use gesture. I had to, you know, I had a very monolithic approach here, because it's like I wanted to express those subjects. Somehow I was like ruthless. I didn't meditate too much about the medium, let's say. I wanted to use the medium, you know. I like to need that color, make that color, apply that color, because the target was the end game, the end final result. But working in my knees is very interesting, because as kids we stay a lot in our knees, and basically the blood flow in our frontal cortex is generating much more flow and inspiration. Actually, it's very healthy, because you work like that, you know, on your knees. And I had this I started the work in my hometown Galați last summer, because I had to start it when my father unfortunately died, and I had to go there. So the first space available where I could do everything was my mother's living room in a house at the edge of the city, at the edge of the city, and not even Uber came there, you know. But it was amazing, because I had the opportunity to stay alone on the edge of the abyss, you know, like in my childhood city, feeling cringe, everybody looking at me strange, and, you know, it was a vibe. And visiting the churches, visiting my old teachers, basically being in that painting. And on the horizon, because my hometown is really close to the Moldovan Republic, and when Transnistria is very close to Ukraine and everything there, I mean, and you see flashes of drones. And I was outside. Of course, I didn't smoke inside because my mother would kill me, but I went outside to smoke, and I was looking for explosions far away. So I was thinking, oh my God, it's horrible, but as an artist, it's such a privilege to work like that, in a way, because you have this the palette of emotions, you know. I mean, you're not protected. You wake up and you realize that this world can become dangerous if there is a lot of diplomatic failure and interest and all blah, blah. But we also have this heaven in us. So I wouldn't condemn this world necessarily. I think we still have chances to evolve and to become peaceful and understanding and compassionate to ourselves and others. But now it's also a battle of generations, and because the church represents somehow the older generations, and if you think about it, like you know, Trump, Putin, Xi, everybody, they are from that generation, and all their generals, their advisors, their priests, their fortune tellers, because they all have, you know, they throw some bones and blood, and yes, you have to send some drugs. I don't know.
No, thank you. I mean, one of the sort of threads also here is sort of a conversation on language in an expansive way. I mean, the language of sort of the sort of access that you use, of course, but also very much the symbolic language that you're using. Sort of, Alex, what has been on my mind that I really wanted to ask you is language actually has such an sort of alphabetic sort of a language, I mean, has such a sort of a presence in your work. There's so many words and sort of micro narrations that are happening. And I would, really invite you to talk a little bit about how language figures in relationship to sort of the images that you're building.
Well, I can't think, in two separate things. Images and language. I guess is the same. It's just signs and drawings, and then I want to put them together. Well, I love to hunt. This hunting words or expressions in daily things and objects like boxes of medicines or cosmetics or newspapers, music, and I guess it's beautiful. This thing. We are here. People from so many different places, and then we are trying to express ourselves in English in this common language, but this, so I love to discover, a special word in German like Trieb, how it sounds, where the word comes from, and the name of my painting is droit de suite, this expression in French, and there's so there are different meanings for this, but I it's curious because I don't like myself to write, I do this, but what I love is to catch, to discover things to steal from the daily life, the words I like.
Yeah. And that makes the work both in terms of how you build sort of images, but also sort of language. It's deeply citational. There is. God, like I can sort of, in this work alone, sort of it opens up to almost like hundreds of sort of pathways of things, of the world somehow, but it becomes sort of kept in sort of a cosmological sort of image. It's really fascinating how you layer the world in that sense as well.
Well, yes, it's really pretentious to think like this, but I love to think about my paintings as books, paintings and books at the same time, but also as time capsules, to send them to the future, and think and have fun with this idea, to people finding them and trying to read it, to understand and discover what was the world we are living in. I guess all this began when visiting colonial places in South America, and the churches and places in Peru and Bolivia, and there are those colonial paintings at a school from Cusco, with a lot of text. They have the images, the holy things happening, but they have to write. There was always a space in the painting, in the canvas, with the text. And then I guess this was the origin of my...
Thank you so much. Sadly, these sort of panels are short, and I have to keep on time because we have lots more fantastic things in front of us. Hortensia, I'm gonna borrow a sentence that you mentioned to sort of close this one off, is because it really stuck with me. Once we survive ourselves, we are ready for the world. And that is something that I think binds a lot of the experience here at this side of the table and on the other side as well, perhaps. So thank you for giving us language and all kinds.
So now we're back. We're back in the foyer of the Moderna Museet, where we today is inaugurating the exhibition House of Nisaba, New Stories of Painting. And we had a fantastic session this morning, and we just had lunch, and now we're coming back with full force. So I leave over to today's moderator and the curator of the exhibition House of Nisaba, Hendrik Folkerts.
Thank you all so much, and everyone, welcome back to the talks that indeed mark the opening of House of Nisaba and sort of the painting expanse that we are seeing in this exhibition, and that we are also here to talk about with many of the artists who have made a new work for this exhibition. The exhibition features the work of 29 artists, and 26 of them have made a new work for the exhibition, which really comes out of an intensive sort of a dialogue that we all have been having over the past sort of 2 years, and with many artists actually for much longer. And since the exhibition is held with so much of that sort of a dialogue, it made a lot of sense to kind of stage that this afternoon as well in this ways, for you all also to meet many of the people who have made the works. And with this conversation, welcome Irena, Haiduk, welcome Kevin Quashie. It's very wonderful that you are here on stage with us this afternoon. I turn both to the exhibition and to the book that we have made, which you can find in the bookshop, of course, because both of you have written for the book, but have a sort of a presence in the sort of exhibition as well. I'm going to start with maybe reading the first line of sort of the text that you have sort of written for this exhibition, which is a text that you will find on this ring, this sort of ambulatory that sort of encircles this sort of exhibition, an exhibition that deals so strongly and that wants to dive so sort of deeply into allegory. And this is what we're going to talk about. And allegory starts with your words here. Here is a book, a word, a sign, presented as if it is yours for the taking. That is the promise. It is a lie that writing offers, an enchantment of wanting to possess possession. Here is a book, a word, a poem, a sign. Let it consume you. Allegory is a word that opens up in many different ways within this exhibition, but also in both of your practices. And so I want to start with that word, allegory, and maybe invite you to give some language on what that word, that notion, kind of does for you in this moment in time. Irena, Haiduk, I would love to start with you, because you've written also the most exquisite sort of a text for this book, which is somewhere between sort of an autofiction and an account of sort of a history. Yeah, I'm going to give the floor to you now.
I'll take this as well. Testing, okay. I'll arrive at it if that's okay. One of the things that really strikes me here at Moderna, and in this exhibition particularly, is that I always notice the sliding doors, then the curtain, then insistence of sliding doors, second sliding doors, and then the exhibition. And I think in this exhibition, this really does, if I may, make an overture kind of in which space the interior resides. Sliding doors being this kind of language of economy, commerce, things we see in malls, airports, not really usually in a museum. And then the curtain, kind of a very theatrical thing, which demarcates the outside, something that resides outside of the frame of art from something that resides inside the frame of art. And then again, insistence on the sliding doors, making this frame of art inextricable from economy. And art not being that which comes from economy, this kind of vector out, gets commissioned, paid for, exhibited, circulated, but that also which has its own economy. And I think it's an economy in my work, and I think in work of many people, is the economy of the studio or the studium, a place that artists offer to the world where we test things. It's not like a laboratory where things have to be controlled and you control results and you have to repeat them. It's a place where, at least whatever that place is, it does not have to be physical. For me, definitely, it is not. It's a place where you can lose control over yourself to learn something about yourself. And in this space, I think this notion of possession, the word that you use beautifully in this circle that you have made is turned on its head. In Western culture, this demarcates in Roman law this kind of mastery over bodies first, and a body always being in debt. But here, this is not the case. In the artist studio, especially when it crosses the boundary of commission of this kind, there is a great kind of unknown and dealing with the unknown, because you didn't know what works you were going to get. And that was very interesting to me. And I think of a studio or a studium, not just this kind of place of inverting possession, but also a place that takes part, that is in public. For me, the studium is always the most interesting when it is in public, where you let artists into an institution and invert this relationship to possession again, but a kind of a demonic possession. The institution allows something, institutions that Hendrik creates, allows something to enter their body, possess them, work itself out, and then the institution learns something from it as well. And when this takes place in public, this is like a place of great testing. And when I think of allegory and this relationship of realism, like Jill was talking about realism, some people were talking about realism as connection to the truth. I'm a big fan of realism because my kind of first use of realism was in the context of the real allegory. This beautiful painting by Courbet from 1855, where he portrays his painter's studio, where it's the first time that he's selling his work from his own studio, being rejected by the official salons. He's showing the economy of his studio from beginning to an end, from inception to exhibition. And we see this image. This image is very much felt, this process is very much felt inside, both within the painting, but also within this kind of road that we take, this following. You said ambulatory, and it's like, when you enter, you see Kevin's text, and you follow it. It's maybe not a theater, because I think Fantasma would not like this idea of choreography or scenography, but a labyrinth, where one does not know what comes next, or where this kind of economy works itself through the institution. So maybe I can start there, and then so that I don't keep going. Yeah, but I can. Maybe Kevin can.
Yeah. I love the way you've glossed possession, because it moves from a kind of capitalist imaginary of wanting to have to actually being possessed by. And I think that's part of what art does, is that if you are before it, this morning Cinga talked about that one is trying to have a relation with the thing, but that relation always opens up to more than you can expect. Even if you think there's nothing in that art for me, I don't understand it. There's something about being provoked, being pushed, maybe even, to pick up on some of Hortensia's language, maybe even being shattered by the thing. So I think that the relationship of thinking about possession as a haunting is very important to me, and very important to thinking about language. Mikhail Bakhtin, the great theorist of the novel, says that language is half someone else's. And of course, Claudia Rankine, the great American poet, takes that idea of this half. It's a terrifying thing, to this our dependency on language, and I don't mean only spoken language, but our capacity to try to take the fury of what we feel or think or know, and to then try to translate it into something, a sign. Alex talked about the signs of language are the signs, the same as the signs of the visual. And we think we are doing something by that translation, except that the word is half someone else's. And then to live in the world with other people and to know that we are dependent on that sharedness, even with others who might have a different ethos than us. And so there's something about the allegorical, let's call it terror, but let's also call it beauty. Thank you for adjusting that. There's something about that for me. There's something about distance and devotion. There's something about the thing you want to have, the thing that you think is you, is also distant from you. And the devotional practice is trying to figure out how close can I get to it, and how much am I willing to bear or risk to get to it. So for me, that's the intelligence of allegory. And if I can just say, Hendrik, if I can praise you and everyone who has contributed to this, I think your inspiration to us was to say, well, how do we think about the praxis of figure and figuration in a way that isn't only about a singular, clear truth, that pushes against that tradition of figuration to understand it in other ways. And I think it's part of the magic of what you have organized here.
Thank you both for beautiful responses and for taking us to words of, like language being half others, or so half sort of belonging to others and sort of the possession that comes with that. But also that other word that you mentioned, sort of the devotional, and of course that is a thread that is spun a bit more subtly through the sort of architecture of this show, because again this circle that your sort of words are sort of on is sort of an ambulatory, and certain codes of the sort of architecture mirror this kind of like sacred space, house of worship. There is a relationship to that somehow, sort of the devotional, but finding its relationship from sort of the devotional to language, to the invocation of this goddess, Nisaba, right, who was the goddess of sort of writing 5,000 years ago, and who is resuscitated, revived, sort of evoked in this moment to not only point to the stories and very sort of fractured and sort of fragmented ways of building narrative that these artists are working with and sort of playing with, but also its relationship to language itself somehow. So I really thank you for that offering. And I want to both ask you another thing in relationship to sort of allegory. And I'm going to start with the essay that you have written for this sort of a text. The essay is part of a much larger sort of world that you are building within your own sort of art and writing, like a practice, which, and I feel like I'm flattening it really if I say that it comes from a space of sort of autofiction, because I think it is more all-encompassing than that. It is a writing through the self. It is finding language through that theory of the self, but also, really like accept the self as sort of an allegorization somehow. And from that point on, you start writing about sort of experiences that you yourself have had in the past, relating it to sort of literary sort of references that are really sort of important to you, such as sort of Bulgakov and other sort of writers that are foundational, I think, somehow. So this sort of allegorization of the self, I'm curious how you would give language to that. And also, just to build one short sort of a bridge to you, I mean, of course, we very much know you as a scholar, but as a scholar who insists on this beautiful sort of expansive sort of interior of the self. Much of your writing is about that and how to give space and language to that. And so, maybe we could come to that later. I think we're going to start with you and then arrive at you later on.
Kevin mentioned Bakhtin, who's also one of my favorites. And I remember when I was reading Tvorчество François Rabelais, this book on the work of François Rabelais, he talked about this line, that parallel line that starts in the real, in realism, in the present, and they can kind of shoot off and create a parallel universe. And the fact that it starts in the real is orienting for the viewer, and that it shoots out into a multitude disorients the viewer, and the reader, I guess, for him. And it's a very productive place, this kind of vibration oscillation between these two. But I think it's important, this moment that also orients, and from which we all share and hopefully can share. I'm very interested in this accumulation of images through language, because I come from a culture that did not go through enlightenment, namely the Balkans, that usually is looked at upon like as something we've missed or a failing. But as I more and more see as a great fortune and advantage. And I believe that the cultures that accumulate images through time in an embodied, highly embodied way and through language are here, are present in this conception of this exhibition. And I'm happy to see images that resist a kind of stereotypical circulation and resist the primacy of the eye by creating like a practice of the eye that is not all-knowing, that does not think that it knows. And the works that have the eye construct the image, even in the most realistic views in this exhibition, we see the eye still has to construct the image by moving through the image, because there's many images within images as well. So that's a kind of a great following, I think, in the language of devotion, following in the language of the line of text which is painted. But I'm also very interested in this equivalence of word and deed, which I think allegory is. I'll owe this to Monica Shevchik, actually, this practice that is realism, allegorical, but also this bridge being, I guess, circumvented or shortened or brought closer together between word and deed. And because this exhibition was incepted as this kind of first because it has to build a foundation for itself, both in this language of identity, which it is trying to circumvent, but also it has to build a ground to stand on, which is not just strictly art historical, but which each practice within this exhibition brings yet another image and then another set of values. So for me, I mean, my text is to do with kind of what is lived, you know, and also provides this kind of, in my life, incredible fortune that I've had to work as a prop assistant at the Yugoslav Dramatic Theatre when I was in my teens, where I realized that people would choose theater over the shelter. And that was incredible to me, because people rejected safety of their own physical body to going to see a play, because that took place in the same time during aerial bombing. And that the art in the end was the safest place because it did not have any fixed value, because it was something that tests everything all the time. And in the time that we live in, which is a time of perpetual war, one way or another, art is a place that can be a home. And when you said that you were going to build a house, I felt like, what a great home in these times. And the great question, what can art do in these kinds of times, I think is demonstrated here. It is not answered, it's demonstrated, which I really also like in this word to deed language. So in my own work, I guess I will maybe conclude just this incredible threshold here, multiple thresholds in connection to economy, marks a place where the frame of art offers life. And I was a prop assistant, I would hand out the props, and I could see the props become alive on stage. The prop was a thing supposedly off stage, and when it would when it would cross the frame of art, this threshold of the stage, it would act. I understood that it wanted to act as much as the actor, and so was the actor, just a person before and then an actor. And in there, everything is alive and everything is acting. And I think following this line that you have made and following these lines within the exhibition, maybe it's not a scenography, maybe it's a place for agency and actors. Yeah.
You said following the line, and I think about maybe another, if I said distance and devotion, I could also say deviation, because part of the built world that Hendrik has made and that the artists have made is a world that has corners and rounded corners and pockets and open spaces and things slip. And even I hope in the text that either the function of the asterisk or the moments where one phrase ends with the word subject and the next phrase starts with the word subject, which is in some ways a deviation, an attempt to recognize, again, maybe distance, to recognize that we're craving a closeness, we're craving an intimacy. That intimacy always has in it some distance, some gap between us and the other, between us and ourselves, that we are either trying to reconcile or trying to bear the burden of that gap. Hendrik, I'll just quickly say, you asked about the interiority. Yeah, I think for me, I think identity, it's indisputable that identity has been useful to people politically, especially to marginalized people. It's also indisputable that identity is a kind of great, there can be a laziness about it, because it allows us, whoever the us is, to think that we know the other person, that we can cite them, that we can sign them. And I guess political order demands of us that we coalesce sometimes in that way. And I always hope that our coalescing doesn't betray what we know, that those signs are, it's like standing outside at night under the sky, and to think yourself allied perfectly with what you can see in the sky is also to recognize the profound lie of that. And so I think for me, as a person racialized Black living in the United States, who recognizes how intense and beautiful and useful that sign, Black, is, how much it can enunciate things about me, and also that it says nothing about me, and that the not silence, the quiet, the rage, the intensity, the hunger, the desire, the furor, the desperation, the tiredness, the ordinariness that lives in me and that I don't control cannot be articulated through the work that sign does. So that there's something too about recognizing let's call it allegorical for lack of a better word, but recognizing that rhythm and that flow, but not betraying what we know that sign can't do. And still to have hope that one can live in and with that dissonance, that too can be a devotional praxis.
I mean, what an amazing line. I mean, how we started sort of a conversation on the artist's own space somehow, and the possibility perhaps of sort of a conflation of the artist's own space in the space of like an exhibition within an institution, but also this sort of allegory of the self. And, you know, one of the strategies that I see emerging so sort of clearly in what these artists are doing is, and it very much speaks to the name that your text has, which is a practice of living. And I love that it says part 1, not unimportant, because there will be more. The sort of a practice of living and this sort of word, sort of identity, and how you beautifully and sort of concisely sort of illustrated sort of the difficulty and sort of the liberating and necessary aspect of that as well, of course. But one strategy is this sort of avatarism that I really find just really an important thing to highlight, because it happens at so many sort of instances and in many different ways where, yeah, the artist, of course, takes a liberty to sort of create a sort of a projection surface for herself or for himself or for themselves, and to speculate with, to fabulate with, to be with in very different ways, I think, what this sort of avatar can hold. And at once, I think it frees us from the restrictions and flattening and sort of vacuity of what sort of identity has also come to mean a little bit. And on the other hand, it anchors us very much in it again about, okay, there are starting points, either in the way that we live or the way that people sort of see us, that are important for this sort of avataristic figure sort of as well. And so I turned in the final minutes of our sort of panel, because I know you have an airplane to catch, to kind of ask if you recognize yourself in this strategy of sort of avatarism, actually.
I guess doubly. I have a art company called Yugo Export, which is an avatar of a former Yugo Export, which was a apparel maker and weapons exporter for a company called Yugo Import, that were both made in the inception of Yugoslavia, that are now kind of the studio that powers my work. And the other is like this, I think this lazy flattening demand to declare oneself that happens all the time. I think, of course, for people who are marginalized the most, can be, I mean, when I teach, the first step is kind of creating a double and allowing oneself experimental rights. Because if you allow the taking of yourself and kind of giving in to these demands of images projected, and very violent images projected, desires that you do not own, wanting to own you, fitting your body into molds that they don't fit, this is very painful, physically and mentally. So creating a double is a kind of a first step where you allow yourself to say, okay, that's not me. This is just a double and I can experiment. I grant myself rights to experiment without harming myself. But powering a double is exhausting, you know, and I think these, at some point one has to return to being, and avatars are very protective, I think, at least to myself. I put a barrier between me and the economy and a barrier between me and the institution, and all of a sudden, in the last years, I don't feel alone anymore, and kind of the form of my work follows. It invites people and makes a home and keeps them there, and we can be awesome together in there and friendly together and then live, enjoy it there. And that's kind of what my art has taught me and brought me, and I'm happy in it. But once the energy runs out to power a fully fleshly double, I think there is also a time to kind of display and find ways to show people that maybe one doesn't have to anymore, or find, like what you have said, after struggling with oneself, finding a way to be in public. And again, yeah.
That seems like a really perfect moment to read the final sentences of your sort of a text out loud here. Inscrutable and essential, these signs, they conspire and collapse. Signs cleave, they adhere and split, they sever and cling. Signs conflate. Can you read? Begets. How do you read? Here is the sign that will house you. Lose and trust your way. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Irena Haiduk. Give them a warm applause.
Thank you.
Irena Haiduk, have a safe flight. I will see you soon. Give love to the people in Oslo. Yes, don't forget your book. Mwah. Kevin, thank you. And I welcome to the stage artist Gordon Hookey, Mikolaj Sobczak, and Mounira Solh, who will make their way. I believe everyone is...
Mounira will be back.
Mounira will be with us. Oh, thank you, Gordy. Would you mind pulling in the chair, Mikolaj? Yeah. Gordy, you want to sit in the middle? Because then Mounira will be with us in a few minutes. You can. Are you okay with the handheld? Okay, fantastic, Gordy. Mikolaj Sobczak, to my left here. Warm applause, indeed.
Thank you.
And Gordon Hookey, very welcome to you as well. Mounira Solh will join us shortly, but I'm going to start us off already. Because Mikolaj and Gordon, your work shares a room, shares a space, actually. It's a space that actually like really goes into the complexities of history. How to hold history, how to see sort of the painting form and medium as a space for writing histories, for showing histories, to rewrite histories as well in many different ways. And Gordon, I'm going to start with you. Because I think over the last decade, we have spoken a lot about this, and you have worked for much longer about that. And the work in the exhibition here is displayed on sort of a curved wall that has quite a radical sort of a curve, that it holds the space between sort of an embrace, a surface, a sort of a chapel almost like space as well. So it has many different forms, and I don't know what you're saying. Sorry?
This is
Irena's phone. Irena's phone. Yeah, okay. Oh, sorry, of course. Thank you, Karina. Just to build on that for one more second, is that there is just one central figure in your work here that I think is a good starting point to talk about. So I would to ask you to take us into the work, and maybe through that also talk a little bit what sort of the relationship to history actually means to you in this work. Gordon.
Yeah, it's interesting just to, I think about history. In the past, like, I say that, you know, I don't actually do history paintings or make history pictures. I make my art about history, so it's kind of challenging that. And like, you know, which the large canvas that I've worked on, there's actually 3 canvases there because the wall was just so large, so as well. But yeah, I suppose the main figure is that large figure of Dundalli, which is a heroic resistance figure back home in Australia, more particular Australia, in Queensland in Australia. And he kept colonisation at bay for something like 13 years as well. So he's very much within the psyche of blackfellas in Queensland, Australia as well. So given the state of the world and I guess the whittling away of our of the world's humanity, it feels like an ideal time to have the long shadow of Dundalli, to try and make our humanity a little bit better than what it could be, actually. So he was the prime representation on the canvas, and that leads into the curvature in the wall, as well as reference to a lot of things that are happening, within the world as well. But that curvature in the wall, it called for something special, something intimate, but also a place where you can feel good, I guess, which is why I use the text, the main text that I've used before also in other works that I've done, and it often inspires me as well, and that's the text by Che Guevara, and if I can remember it goes something like this. I might have to shut myself. At the risk of feeling ridiculous, it is that the true revolutionary is guided by deep feelings of love. So that's kind of the feel-good, warm and fuzzy part of, the little intimate circle.
I don't know if you could...
Yeah, sorry. So I guess the wide space of the canvas leading into that wide space determined what I put in that curvature.
Absolutely. And the curve becomes important because, in your work, Gordy, the long arc of history becomes the material for the work, right? Where you're sort of clearly, relating the legacy of like a freedom fighter, or sort of, you use this other word for him as well. What is that word?
Terrorist.
Terrorist, which is sort of a wordplay, of course, and wordplay happens so often in your work, where you kind of reframe the sort of English language into something that you have made your own in many different ways. But you frame this kind of like a freedom, this historical freedom fighter, into sort of a contemporary figure almost, the specter of which is sort of evoked in light of what is happening in the world right now, with sort of raging wars sort of everywhere. And I think it's interesting because all of your works exist on a curve, actually, and it's a material and formal sort of a relationship that is happening here, where a long arc of sort of a history becomes visible. Mounira, Solh, welcome also to this panel, and I want to talk about sort of the curve. I want to talk about scale in your work as well, because that has come to play like a really big role. But just to give a little bit of space to what you have expressed in this work is sort of a body. We see a body. We see a body kind of hurled across this sort of a curve, right? And it's a body subjected to the memory and sort of the realities of war, of violence, of a lot of different things. It's also a body sort of trying to find her way. It's a body kind of that sort of exists in so many different sort of configurations. Can you bring us into your work by starting to talk about that body?
Right. So, first of all, thanks for having us. And as you said yesterday in your speech, like a bunch of artists and friends, I feel this now. Many of us have met already and done some exhibitions or have crossed paths. And it's really touching to be here again together. Thanks. So, yeah, that body, I mean, first of all, the title of the work is more like it's not really abstract, but it's sutfa, and it's a certain time, a night hour, you know, when it's really dark, one of the darkest hours of the night in Arabic language. So, to me, this body is like being in the war. It's like being in one of those hours where you are usually supposed to sleep, but you can't because of the bombing. You're aware that you might die. You just accept it, you know. And usually they use these hours to mark a ceasefire time, right? So after that, you would think, now maybe I'm still alive, you know, or who died, who survived. So this body is a body that is trying to survive, that is reacting to all these wars that, I mean, we were born in, and as you know, it has not finished. It's just now, as we talk, continuing. So it's also the female body, if I may dare to say, and with a lot of what brings with it in its own luggage, right? Or expectations, or positioning, or existence, so to speak. So it contains a lot of things, that body. It can even become like a ball that you throw, you know, when an explosion is there, your body flies with it. It flies you out. You cannot control where you go. So it's like this movement of being thrown by the... First it sucks you in, and then it throws you back out. So it's kind of this uncontrollable throw that you get, or also when you want to, if you can resist it, how you can block it by your own body action or posture, so to speak. Yeah. So it's a bit of all of that.
Thank you, Mounira. We, in sort of the dialogue that we had before this one, we talked about sort of a paradox of identity being a restrictive and an expansive kind of word that sort of holds you down and kind of sort of frees you at the same time. I've often looked at your work with a similar lens, because when I look at this body, it's also extremely non-static, right? You've made literally different sort of configurations of this body over an arc of war, over decades actually, and again happening right now in this moment. And in other parts of your work, there is also a refusal almost of this body, of sort of a people, being sort of defined exclusively by their experience of war. Life is more sort of complex than that, right? There are everyday things that happen, and that is really important. So there is, again, this kind of sort of two sides of this work as well, where I feel, yes, this work is very explicitly about war. It's also, formally speaking, in its size, modeled after another work that you want to talk about, perhaps, which we can, or if you want to. So war is there as sort of a reality, and the violence that this body is sort of subjected to, but the body is almost like moving in such a way that the experience of her is more sort of expansive and sort of complex than that. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you've always walked that line a little bit in your work?
Right. So when I was at school in Lebanon, I had a teacher and an artist. She's an artist, Greta Naufel, and she would always bring up examples. One of them was Guernica of Picasso. Okay, I know he's male and he's, but that piece meant to us because we were in the war, right? So it touched us that there was such a piece. And a couple of years ago, I had this urge, I have to do something like that. You know, it's just like, sometimes it's also like therapy or something, but I had to communicate with a piece that was there, that was part of our also, things we talked about already when we were 14. Around the 90s, when they claimed the war was finished, which of course still the south was occupied by Israel, the Syrian army still occupying Lebanon, we were still, but we thought, oh, okay, some people were thinking, oh, the war finished. I never believed it was finished, but still there was some space to think, to reflect, because the guns were put a little bit on the side, so to speak. In that times we were reflecting on the war while still living in it, but not in the same way as during the civil war. So these years were very important because I was also becoming a teenager, and a lot of the Lebanese who were abroad came back, so we were learning, also exchanging with them, and so on. And around those years that Guernica came. And now, 2 years ago, I had the chance to work with Bibi Fadlallah. She's from Sudan. She's a filmmaker. She was commissioned to make a film about my practice. And she asked me, if you have a wish now, where would you like to go? And I told her, I'd like to go to Guernica and like be there with it.
To the Reina Sofia in Madrid.
And via our friends, we could go there, and the director and so on, friends of friends, we were able, actually you can go there on Tuesdays to be alone with this piece. So we went there and I just performed with it without really planning it. And it was my way to study it. It's a way, unconventional way, I think, or very physical way to study a work of that scale, 350 by 7. And then when we were talking, the idea came that let's keep this as a connection. But then at the same time, you know, for example, after the August 4 explosion, you know, and
in Beirut,
and also the images from the civil war, but the August 4 explosion, now what's happening, you always have this black and white, you know, full of dust, black and white, bluish. The city colors go, you know, that's terrible. And that's what he painted. Well, actually, Picasso saw Guernica in a newspaper in black and white. He was in Paris, I think. And there's also the story, the Nazis came at that time to his studio in Paris and they saw it and they were like, what did you do? He told them, what did you do? I painted what you did, or something like that. So for me, this black and white is really heavy. I cannot take it. So I had to have colors. Some people after the war, they cannot take red anymore. They cannot live with it anymore. To me, it was black and white. So there was also thinking, what would be my version? And actually, if you look in the Arab world, Palestinian artists, Iraqis, you name it, they all made their Guernicas, you know, because of what we've been going through. And I only discovered this later when I decided that's what I want to do. There was even an exhibition on such a thing in Beirut last year. So I thought, I want to do my own, I have to do my version of, it's also for me a bit therapeutic.
Absolutely. Mikolaj, I'm interested to speak to you because we're entering into a different realm slightly, of course, but we're still talking about the long arc of history in many different ways. And sometimes the desire to find ancestry, to find points of sort of recognition in a certain history. In your case, it was a shared sort of journey, I think, with many people, some of here with us this afternoon, to understand how sort of certain sort of queer histories are not just kept in the body and felt in the body, as we have also listened to this morning, but also, become intellectual sort of coordinates almost to form a universe of your own. And so we have your work again on sort of a curved wall, where on the far left we see the muse of history, sort of Clio, kind of peeping through the peephole of time almost, observing a scene of sorts, observing language as well, observing historical figures, but sort of created in a mythology of their own. Without giving too much away, I will stop talking, and maybe if you want to take us a little bit through the peephole of time into the universe that you have made in this work.
Sure, with pleasure. Thank you for this beautiful introduction. Yes, indeed, the muse of history, Clio, is sitting in her bunker, which is adorned with kind of sacred marvels appropriated from Fra Angelico frescoes that he created in San Michele Monastery next to Florence, in order to kind of provoke fellow monks for a meditative state. And this meditative state, it is something what really accompanying is my life since many years, because I am very much interested in this question, actually, how the history is written, not because I am so much stuck in the past, or I do believe that it was anyhow better in the past. I just noticed that our whole time is like a DNA chain. It is a set of the same patterns that are keep on repeating and multiplying. And I started to believe that art and artists are able to reimagine those patterns differently, and this impact by showing the art to the publicity will be that strong that this pattern will start to repeat already mutated, using the biological genetical language. And when you mentioned the Guernica and that so many victims of war use this archetypical almost image of Guernica, already proves my artistic hypothesis that these patterns, art can really change how we kind of see what is happening now, using the past codes, or I prefer to say the archetypes, the images, symbols that we are all born with. And within my painting, Clio is looking through this little hole to check what is happening, what we're gonna repeat. But the whole joke in the painting is that the hole is so small that the light is extremely strong that it blinds her. She loses her iris if you look closely. So when you climb the ladder 2 meters high, you will see that Clio has no iris. And so the question is, what history overlooked, what history erased, and what we as an artist or culture makers can use to reimagine the past in order to protect the future. So I was also lately reading a lot of literature around fascism and anti-fascism, and is there any way to kind of identify this fascist pattern that will keep on repeating in our society? And in one of those books, not maybe my favorite one, but it's Umberto Eco, How to Spot a Fascist, that's the title. It's a tiny little book. And
because it's easy?
No, because it was based on his lecture, that's why. That's the only reason why it's small. But he writes something what really touched me personally, because he said, I immediately recognized that fascism is coming back through syncretism in culture. When, like New Age, Stonehenge mixed with tarot and astrology, I know, okay, fascism is coming. And I'm like, this is what I'm doing. So am I bringing the fascism? Shit. I wanted to do something else, you know? And so I immediately started to think, how can I fight myself and against myself and use this collage form in order to actually prove that this syncretism can go somewhere else. So I started to obsess, for example, around astrology or the archetypes in tarot, and I tried to read it through the art. So I noticed that, for example, Neptune, the planet of the art, the planet of imagination, entered the sign of Aries. And last time it was in 1861. So I immediately checked what was happening, and of course it was a civil war in US and all those stuff, but what was happening in art? And this was very interesting because it was already mentioned, the main artist was Courbet. That was the time. So Courbet was en vogue, and Impressionists started to be en vogue too. So I was like, okay, so there's this enormous shift from political, historical propaganda in order to say, like, our little simple lives actually matter too and can change this official narrative. That's why in this enormous kind of historical painting, almost like Courbet, I wanted to show a historical scene, but actually the scene when we just got a bit cuckoo and we hacked the Christian Dior hotel on Capri, and we ruined 7 influencers' photo shoots on the beach by stealing the Christian Dior mattresses.
Why were you on that specific sort of island that may need a little sort of a context and explanation?
Yeah, we were like, oh, guys, as a queer individuals, we need to write the queer history because nobody else will do it for us, obviously. The same for Aboriginal people and the same for victims of the war. Nobody will write the history for us because always the winners write the history. So we were, let's go to Capri because it was such a safe haven during the Nazi time. Many queers traveled there to be safe. Let's visit the villas, let's find the photos, what we will be there. I don't know. There was a summer, we bought mozzarella di bufala, we got good wine, we got lazy, and we said, what if instead of researching history, we start to write it ourselves? And this question changed my brain chemistry because I realized that I'm responsible of what will be researched in the future. So this realization that actually our lives are important, it's not only about looking in the past, it's also about surviving here and now, made me to paint this holiday moment almost utopic when you think about everything what is happening right now. Definitely idyllic, as this important historical scene.
I mean, this is an important shift, and I'm happy that you're emphasizing it so strongly, because I think it is words and language that, all of you can sort of identify with. It rubs shoulders with the word responsibility, which I actually would rather not use, because I think it hinges on the wrong, it hinges on the wrong thing. But there is a sort of a task that I think you take up as well, sort of Agordi, to say, okay, I actually have the language, visual, but also sort of actual sort of alphabetic language. I have sort of a platform within my sort of artistic and sort of public sort of a space to tell history in like a different way. And to build that sort of a platform also for a future, actually. Could you, like, when did that realization that you described so wonderfully come to you, actually, Gordy?
Well, it's interesting that you did say that about, being on that, if I can call it a cusp of determining, in a sense, history. Because as artists, I'd like to think we look at society, look at culture, and basically we just make a picture of what we see, as simple as that. And then sometimes we hold that picture up to society and culture as a mirror. And many times, people don't like what they see. But I mean, that's the role that we play. But also, there's another cliche that we use back home. We have, within our cosmology, the creation, which generally people will call it dreaming. And we often say, what we do now, what we make now, is part of culture. We're making culture. 20 years from now, we'll be seen as part of that dreaming. So just to, carry on from what you were saying earlier as well. So, and I guess there's many different ways that we do that as artists. And, for me, it's just being a part of a community and responding or making pictures, as simple as that, about our community as well. And it so happens that, communities like my community is so interconnected nationally and internationally and all around the world, which is great to be able to be here and to share.
Mounira, I want to maybe articulate this question to you a little bit differently, because I am struck by a couple of images that you described, namely being in front of that sort of Guernica work and sort of embodying it, or trying to like really approach it with your body in this sort of a performative manner. I also remember this beautiful video that you shared with me when you first unrolled your own work, and it was empty, it hadn't been made yet, but you rolled out this roll on the floor and you started to almost like dance with it. This was a very physical sort of a relationship, and I'm trying to sort of attract that back a little bit. Of course, like this word that we've been using very freely, like history, is not a problematic word. It has been, of course, critiqued in many different ways over many years, actually. But I think for you, your relationship to that has often been sort of an embodied one in many different ways, as we see in your work as well, but also like an everyday sort of practice, that you've always been interested in the right to allow sort of the complexity of things to be on equal footing, or the small sort of things of life to be on equal footing with the larger narratives that we may be subjected to or sort of a part of. And so, I invite you to maybe on the one hand speak a little bit about that moment of being with a work with your body and unrolling that work, but also this insistence on the everyday, the insistence of sort of embodiment, finding different relationship to that word history.
Right. So indeed, like when I got this canvas, it became like a stage for me. So I opened it, and I gave myself the time I needed to take to kind of embrace it. So I was performing on it. I was like living on it, and like physically being present on it, and until eventually history and what is our personal history. And when you start to have like the 4th or the 5th decade behind you, then you also, other things start to happen. It's really very interesting actually, because you have history also, you know. And so on that canvas, I was like putting in the actual feeling, or let's say, how the body reacts, but also there were bits and pieces from things I went through as a kid, but also things I went through as a daughter or later as a mother, within those war moments, or maybe even as a body who wants to resist. The middle body who is on the Rawshe rock, يعني صخرة الراوشة, where the woman is doing this kind of position. This is a little bit different than the others, because the others, as if they are thrown as a consequence of the war, but this one stops there, and it's like she's climbing that rock and, you know, preparing to act against what is happening. But at the same time, I mean, we have those colors, we spoke about them. The rock has like green and yellow, and because I also had the studio, was hosted by my friend Nisrin Khudr, who's also an artist in Beirut for like many years, in a studio where from it I could see that rock. And actually when I studied art at the Lebanese University, we were in a building above that rock, which is really an emblematic spot in Beirut. So lucky to be there. So for me, it's also an anchor point in history, in the Lebanese history, but also it came from an 11th century where they say there was an earthquake that made that rock separate from land, and it kind of, let's say this is land and this is the rock. So it's like, and it's like 40 meters high. And it has many stories. I mean, it's also very famous. If you want to suicide, you go to that rock and you jump from it. There is also a race of people jumping from up there. I know people who jumped from there who were champions from jumping that rock. I mean, it has many popular stories around it, and love stories even, or, you know, the people who live in this region, for them, it really means a lot, this Rawshe rock. So for me, it also was, let's say, the anchor or the center of the painting. In the meantime, when the war happened again now, there was a day where 1 million people had to escape. You know, they had a few seconds, minutes to leave. And on these locations, there were people who had to sleep there, to live there, until they know what will happen next. So, I mean, that is the thing with Lebanon. You would be like, you don't even have the time to reflect, because as you reflect, one more thing is happening, one more thing, one more thing. And it keeps on going like that. So that is like, when you think of history, you think of the past, but actually, no, it's really the now, the tomorrow, all these things stitched together, I think.
Exactly. Maybe one last aspect that I want to highlight in relationship to your work is, you know, and it's sort of true for all artists, I think, sitting here. The mythological and like speculative aspects of finding a relationship to sort of a time and sort of a history and many things that we sort of spoke about, because on the one hand, you know, also your work And in fact, you're making a book at the moment about it, which is going to appear in like a month or two, on sort of anti-fascism. So on the one hand, it's sort of anchored in sort of a political sort of a grounding, of course, and on the other hand, yeah, a belief in the power of like the speculative and like the fabulational and sort of the mythological and the mystical as well. Just I'm wondering how you maybe not like reconcile or like but hold the two at the same time.
Thank you for the little promo of the book. The book is indeed coming in the June. It will be entitled Anti-Fascist Art Manifesto. It's strong title, easy to remember as a good gossip. And the myth making and the imagination is for me extremely important tool of the anti-systemic activities, because nowadays in let's say very late stage of capitalism, you name it, neoliberalism, techno-feudalism, it has so many different names, but the one thing is extremely important, and it's stuck with us from the golden age of British Empire. It is the idea of we are individuals. So all of a sudden we all started to deeply believe or even be sure that when we are poor or we are sad or we cannot find partner, it is our fault. So you need to either work harder or go to psychotherapy or take a pill, etc. And in ancient times, which are much, much longer than the last stage of capitalism, it was this beautiful concept of being favor and out of favor of gods. So when you are famous, Fama, the goddess of famous, is supporting you. But when you lose her favor, you become hubris. So you start to make mistakes because you are thinking that you are invincible. And in fact, I don't believe that ancient Greeks were more stupid, and they did believe that Fama is flying somewhere. They just use those beautiful, profound metaphors to describe extremely complex system of the system we are living in. And it's really hard to point like why some artists have international crazy careers in 5 sentences, and why some artists are part of something what was called, I don't know, dark matter. There was this dark matter theory in arts, I think 10 years ago. And Greeks, in order to explain this complexity, they were using the metaphor of gods. And I think it is extremely fascinating to try to ask ourselves who would be, or how would modern Dionysus work like, or look like, or how would modern Apollo look like, or who would be modern muses. So this is something what I really dedicate in my art by portraying people that I know, friends, as well as myself, in those kind of goddess forms, to just show that we are all part of much, much complex system, and what every populism is doing is giving simple answers for very complex problems. So I prefer to talk a myth than saying that it's a queer people's fault or it's a migrant's fault or whatever, because of course it's the ruling class fault, but in order to realize it, we must think that there is some higher power than we are, and this power is all the systemic relations.
Thank you. Indeed, a powerful note to end this panel on. Mounira, Gordon, Mikolaj, thank you so much. Give them a warm applause. It is, we promised you a marathon, and a marathon you shall get. We are taking a 15-minute break, but after that we will be back at 2:45 with Naudline, Melanie, and Matthew. So yeah, let's grab a coffee, take a restroom break, and see you in 15 minutes. Thank you so much.
So we're back on. Welcome to the third session of this day of meeting the artists of House of Nisaba. For you at home who want to see all of this program, who comes into this intermission now, the transmission, you can see the whole program on Facebook and on YouTube. So, time for the last session of the day. And as usual, I hand the word over to our moderator and the curator of the exhibition House of Nisaba, Hendrik Folkerts.
Thank you so much, Ulf. Wow, that's quite loud. Welcome back, everyone, after the break. I hope you're hydrated and caffeinated, whatever you need. We are continuing our conversations with the artists who are part of the exhibition House of Nisaba, which opened at Moderna Museet as of this morning. We've been celebrating, of course. We have been speaking about a lot, and sort of the painting sort of discourse that is, kind of this exhibition focuses on, but also that we're hoping to get deeper into with these panel conversations. So welcome back, and I'm going to start with introducing our speakers. Naudline, Pierre, welcome. Yes, applause. Matthew Lutz-Kinoy, welcome. And to my left, Melanie Kitti. Welcome, Melanie. So happy you're here. Naudline, I want to start with your work. It's I'm looking at it actually. It's wonderfully looking back at me there. It is on sort of a curved wall as well, which is a conversation that, we've been having, of course. Like, how does that work, right? It's a very different way of working for you. Also, I think in making this work, there's a different scale, perhaps, than what you normally use. But there is a sort of dedication in there as well, namely to a figure that has been with you for a really long time. And this morning, we already spoke a little bit about the sort of avataristic nature of some of these figures that we see in the show, and your work is very much part of that sort of discourse, I think. But scale, sort of the curved wall, there's a couple of formal and sort of material things happening there that I'm sort of curious what that did to your articulation and being with this figure.
Right. We talked about that curved wall for so long, and I thought it was going to be really interesting to have that sort of, that sort of shape with the figures in the painting. But this is the largest painting I've ever made, and on a continuous canvas. And surprisingly, it took a lot of movement in my body, and I think that opened up a new space in my mind for process. I literally had to be like using my full, arm's length, or, reaching at the top of a ladder. And I think it really shifted how I think about the central figure, and also how I think about creating a painting that sort of moves through different worlds.
Exactly. And there's a kind of, there's this opportunity of this like central figure, which is also literally at the center of this work, of course. And, her hair that moves across the entire work, also sort of embracing these other figures that sort of exist in these works. Just a very sort of practical sort of a question, something that I have been sort of wondering. The sort of a presence of these other figures next to this sort of central figures, do you see this as like variations, as sort of a branching out, as different sort of articulations, or do they really occupy different voices and different roles in the work?
I think they occupy different voices and different roles. When I was making the painting, I was thinking a lot about the past, present, and future, and somehow all of that colliding. And these different beings have different needs and different identities and different desires, and each of them want to be seen how they want to be seen. Yeah.
This is really beautiful, and I'll circle back to that actually, because the desire to be seen in like a certain way is something that we spoke about as well, of course. But Matthew, I want to turn to your work for a moment, because It was the work in the exhibition, and we see it actually at various intervals within the show. As you walk into the exhibition, you see sort of two of your works installed in this very like vertical manner. And then kind of you turn and you kind of see it sort of again as you walk into the exhibition as sort of a column-like type of sort of install, and assuming that type of architectural verticality almost. But it was, we talked about this a lot, the work that was the hardest to install in a very good way, I have to say. And it was because of its sort of architectural form. And we have spoken a little bit about how this sort of exhibition has such a specific sort of architecture devised by Forma Fantasma. And as we started install, that sort of architecture was there. It had settled in. We knew what it was going to be. And your work, being so sort of architectural, added a layer to that. And I was wondering if you could take us a little bit into the choice to make something so sort of architectural, and then we can maybe from there dive into other aspects of the work.
Okay, so yeah, I'm sorry that it caused some kind of problems for the install, but I love to make exhibitions, and I love thinking about exhibition architecture. And I tend to think of painting as a kind of architecture in itself. And I love to work on really large formats. So thank you so much for bringing together all these artists who also produce like these large format pieces, because it's a pleasure to look at that. And like this is kind of like, I feel like you wove a basket full of really ripe fruits. And it's really like fruity. And so actually, when you proposed that Forma Fantasma would do the exhibition architecture, I was kind of like, oh no, like it's gonna be really challenging, because I think of painting as the architecture. And normally there's like a given architecture in a space, like you go to a artist-run space, you know, you have some crumbling wall, you have like a thing, it's all stuff you can deal with. And when there's this like fantasy architecture that didn't exist, it was really hard for me to kind of understand what the show was. And so I asked you if it would be okay to hang the paintings on the walls of the museum, because I wanted to emphasize in a way the relationship between the exhibition architecture and the existing space of the museum. I paint on the floor, and I like to paint like with the unstretched canvas on the floor. And so there's always this, a lot of play between like surface. Like there's like, you're on the floor, but then this thing might go then on the ceiling or on the walls. And so there's always this kind of like spinning of the illusion of space that you're making on the canvas is like always spinning. And I made these works in this column shape in a way to emphasize this kind of element of architecture in the space. And I thought it would be, in a way, like easier to create a kind of dynamic relationship to like the height of the wall and like the angles and corners of the room.
I mean, you took us in there wonderfully, because I mean, one thing that I want to hook in on, indeed, Matthew's work is the only work in the exhibition that is installed on sort of the museum's own walls. And it's something important to note, actually, because it exists in that way, both as a structural support, right? It kind of like how to say this? Attaches itself to something that is already there somehow. And on the other hand, it exists in sort of the periphery of something and of the sort of exhibition itself. So it's sort of a presence is articulated in very different ways at the same time. And I want to link that a little bit, the sort of a presence of that work in the exhibition, to something that you have been thinking about for a long time, which is sort of ornament and sort of the sort of ornamental, and how that has functioned art historically, but also in sort of architectural history, as something that in modernist time, for instance, was really frowned upon, was seen outside of like the structural function of a sort of architecture to articulate its form and its function, right? and in sort of other time, let's say sort of the Rococo was actually a very central element to articulating a certain sort of artistic thesis. And so, do you want to talk, take us into the relationship to sort of the decorative and the sort of ornamental, and maybe also in sort of a relationship to how it, kind of functions in these works that you've made for House of Nisaba?
It's like a lot of questions you asked, so I feel a little bit
packing it in. I'm packing it in.
A little overwhelmed. Okay, but let's say I tried to title all the paintings differently, but maybe one of them was titled after a Fragonard painting, which he showed in the salon, and it was kind of like it was a bunch of cherubs. It was a kind of a study for a commission that he was going to make for like a patron ceiling, and because it was like a commissioned work, kind of referencing his kind of economic status or like his relationship to patronage, and it was like a little bit like this kind of decorative chubby angels on a ceiling. People, they didn't like that, and all the critics said he was like trashy and it was like a bad look, to show this kind of decorative thing that sort of also in a way exposed the working infrastructures of art economy and the support structures that artists have to live with in order to make their work, and those kind of systems at play. So one of the paintings is titled after this piece. I think it's called something like Angels in the Sky or Group of Children in the Sky. I really love pictures of babies in painting history. There's a moment in the Rococo time period when there's a lot of images of children performing adult tasks. So you have like little kids like being like an astronomer, or a little baby doing like water engineering, and it's like very entertaining. But actually, I think it's kind of like an interesting reflection on the way we think about labor today. And so I've been looking at a lot of babies, and so I put all these babies on the paintings because their kind of relationship to an audience is always like shifting. The symbol, it kind of, through repetition, it's like a shifting image and a shifting symbol in a space of projection. And this idea that the pattern, the decorative, promotes systems of projection and a kind of space of projection where you touches on language and the malleability of language, symbol language and its malleability, is something that drew me very inside of like the decorative. And the possibility to share, to create a shared space where you let an audience inside of an image, but inside of the shared space, you really give a platform to allow for the space of projection. And I think the decorative and the idea of kind of mixture between symbol, language, and repetition is something that drew me inside of this kind of universe.
And that is wonderful. I really love this language, I have to say. And can you sort of project that language maybe on your experience now of seeing these four works or this body of work into the space here? How that functions for you?
Oh, I don't know. What I wanted to say was that something that I saw in the exhibition, which I wanted to say to like you guys and to the artists present, was that I always was thinking about these, also you assigned this task for the artist to make like a singular work, but then I made 4 paintings, and I didn't really understand a lot of the tasks because you made this exhibition architecture and then I didn't hang it in the exhibition or whatever. But then I was like, wait, these paintings through their scale and through their kind of ability to kind of create moments of different kind of simultaneity inside of one image, creates this kind of multiplicity inside the kind of frames. And I was like, oh, it kind of, so I saw this through this dynamic, because I was like, okay, I made this kind of series, but actually there's this kind of, and I thought through series, you also create narrative. And then inside of these large pieces, I also, they host these kind of multiple narratives inside of those spaces. And so I think because I sort of resisted this kind of singularity, I also it opened up the kind of multiplicity inside of these large formats.
Absolutely, I want to give that a little bit sort of emphasis actually, because I think that's kind of sort of a fracture is a very important aspect of this sort of exhibition, but a fracture as the multiple in sort of a space of sort of multiplicity that at the same time offers a sort of continuity within this sort of exhibition as well, because I'm meeting your work at so many different sightlines and sort of viewpoints, similar to, for instance, the work of Agnes Shearer that is inside of this ring, which some of you may have seen already. Wow, I'm seeing her work at a lot of different points, even though her work is supposed to be, one line, one narrative, but it can never be unless you walk with it, right? So I think, yeah, that type of gravity towards that multiplicity and that sort of a fracture was an incredibly important part of how your work sits within this sort of exhibition, and I thank you for it, of course. I just want to maybe before I head to you, Melanie, Naudline, there is that moment when I'm standing in front of your work and Matthew's work is kind of, in sort of the background of that, that I think about sort of the decorative in relationship to each other, and I'm just curious if you have a relationship to that word as well, and how that works for you.
I do. I think pattern and symbol and decorative elements are a huge part of my painting language. But I just want to say I love those paintings, and I think the way that they hang on the wall and sort of meet at that corner is so arresting, but I forgot the question you asked me.
Sort of the decorative, but I think it's sort of plays out in a very different way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like decorative for in my painting, the hair is excessive. It's a lot, so it becomes more than hair. And I think kind of taking an image or a symbol and repeating it and making it bigger and kind of making you sick of it because it's so in your face. To me, that's my way of kind of engaging with decoration or the decorative arts or whatever, and also texture and color and all of that.
Thank you, Naudline. Melanie, I just wanted to ask you, because we've been talking a little bit about how work sits within the exhibition, of course, and I think I'm hearing something, or is it in my head? I don't know, maybe. Sorry, I'm coming back to you. We've been talking about how the work sits within the exhibition in sort of architectural modes, in sort of this sort of wall that we've been speaking about. And your work was the first work to enter into this exhibition because you made it very site-specifically, actually. You work in a way in sort of a fresco way, sort of al fresco, right? And the wall that we see, which is your work, is the exact size of that wall because it is the wall in so many ways. Can you talk about how you make this work, just literally about the sort of process of making it, before we go into a little bit what we see in it?
Yeah. From the beginning, I started working with fresco actually, but as objects, because I wanted to take them off the wall. I didn't want to work directly onto the wall, so I found out that I could cast plaster forms and paint, apply limestone and sand onto that, and then suddenly it became important for me to work, bring it onto the wall, and so I did that in Malmö at Möt Konstnärerna, and that's where you saw my work the first time, and so it also kind of made sense to do it here, since you were also making that architecture with Forma Fantasma. I'm supposed to say how I do it, yeah. So the wall was built by, like it was drawn into the architecture, and then we built it in 6 parts, so it's possible to take it down in 6 parts, because if it's too heavy in one piece. And so it's a kind of fiber plaster which is like behind, and then we apply a mix of limestone paste and sand, and then I mix the pigment with the water from the limestone paste. And I work in layers, so I attach paste, and then I scrape off, and then I apply more, and so it's kind of like an excavating method where I kind of like find the motive while I work intuitively. Yeah.
And I feel that, like, just visually speaking, if I stand in front of it and how it's also lit, I can really see that scraping off and this application. It's really this sort of a process becomes visible as sort of an archaeology. This is a word that we've been using a lot in the way that we speak about this work, and this sort of excavatory sort of method, right? And I sort of jokingly said, in the beginning, it feels as if that work has always been there, and we're building the whole show sort of around it somehow. It's sort of the cave painting that kind of started this whole exhibition, because what we see in there is this extremely hybrid figure, right? It exists between human and non-human. It exists between different sort of animalistic type of figurations. It's a fantastical figure. How did you sort of arrive at that figure?
I don't know. I kind of start with a motive. I think I work with my own history, but as I was saying to you, it's very weird to say that I work with my own history and then that's the result. But like, I'm a poet also, and I think it's more visible in my books or in my poetry that it has to do with like my own memories and my own fragments of my life. I think it starts with a memory, and then I paint that, and then this figure kind of the forms kind of like appear while I work.
Just to go to... No, you absolutely did. I mean, because it's interesting to highlight maybe sort of the relationship to the writing sort of a process. Just to understand a little bit, does writing sometimes come out of, let's say, this type of work, or the other way around, that sort of visual artwork comes out of writing? How do you kind of like move between the two, and do they infect each other?
Yes, I think so, because I think my poems are in a way half painting, half poetry, and there also, I think the hybrid form is very there in everything I do. It's always something in between, like it's always a mix of prose and poetry, and it's both sculpture and painting, and it's and the motives are also hybrid, and I think that's also, like, in a way, something that has to do with my own, like, feeling, like a feeling that I have had in with myself. Yeah.
No, thank you. And I'm interested to kind of like talk a little bit more also in the sort of a group on this hybrid sort of practice, because the show highlights for many artists in the exhibition one aspect of their sort of practice. And for many artists, they are sort of writers or sort of performance artists as well. Are they, you know, they occupy many different roles. And Matthew, you and I actually met through sort of a performance sort of a practice that you've held for like a really long time. You already mentioned that, you know, you like this form of sort of exhibition, right? So you're interested in sort of architecture and exhibition design and making exhibitions yourself as well. How do you feel that sort of the painting aspect of your wider sort of practice is infected by these other forms?
Yeah, you used to be like a performance curator.
I know.
Yeah. So that, yeah, and we got to do projects in nightclubs and really like wild locations, and that was so fun to do. And actually, we met at a time when I just had started painting. I had been, I was playing in some bands and had some musician friends, and I liked to dance, and so I would just make up dances and perform alone. And I was missing some like context because I felt kind of like this like flailing body, and I was like searching for like what the scenography could be for that, because like the temporality of like a nightclub and stuff is like sometimes a little bit too vulnerable. So I started to make these backdrop paintings for my dance performances, and I would paint, and so it was a kind of continuous flow, because I would like get really excited and put on a costume and buy some like cheap high heel shoes and like dance around on the canvas and throw paint everywhere, and then I would like kind of create this kind of surface that I could hang behind me while I would perform. And so like I think like now I started to become interested in painting histories and technique also, because I just kept doing it, and I kept kind of becoming interested in like the shape of the thing and how kind of unrefined or refined it could become. And so, but I think I always stay very close in my heart to, and I think actually in the way I like to make paintings, through a very performative act. And I think that this relationship to like, you know, I guess because I grew up in New York City in, you know, this like post-Abex kind of terrain, and there's like this idea of like an authentic gesture or like a relationship to the self that's like expressive, and this kind of I thought that never really left space for the audience because it's too individualistic. And I thought, oh, like, what is this kind of authenticity inside of a painted space, and how do you let someone in? But I just think through sharing your systems of action, and painting can create a kind of space for people. So I think in the same way that performance can do that, you know, I always like to think about Jose Esteban Munoz and how he talks about a theater space and the view into this kind of space of potential that a theater space or a stage can like can give you. And I think painting has this potential too.
100%. I want to ask you this like a question too, but maybe as an observation to share. I think two observations. One, I think in this exhibition and all these sort of practices, we can see a lot of sort of hybridity, what we're sort of speaking about now, but also the impact of sort of the performance history since, you know, let's say or in our lifetime, when sort of that medium entered into more sort of institutional structures, and how it has now really started to impact not just sort of this, but sculpture and sort of exhibition making. And I'm really interested in how that knowledge coming from sort of a performance field is starting to enter now into these other media and mediums, actually. For me, this is a very rich moment. And, you know, like just speaking from sort of a personal sort of perspective, I can also see how for myself, starting in sort of the performance field, how that has led into a different form of sort of exhibition making. So yeah, this is for me a really sort of urgent thing to think about. Side note, sorry, Naudline, I'm making my way back to you. Is to understand also how that works for you. Are certain kind of like other forms of art, let's say, in lack of a better term, kind of really important for you to fold into sort of a painting sort of a practice, and how that sort of plays out for you?
I think so. I mean, I see myself as a sponge, and anything from lived experience to memory to fantasy to theater, dance, music, it all kind of comes into the work. I've always been interested in performance. I haven't gotten there yet, but in the meantime, I think in painting, I'm performing the role of a sort of medium or transcriber, translator, and that's like my little toe in the, you know, performance water. But yeah.
No, it's exactly. But that metaphor of you being a sponge, I just want to hook a little bit into that to understand maybe better in this specific work. You know, one can read it or one can be with it in like a couple of different ways. You know, there is a relationship to sort of mythology, obviously. There's a relationship to kind of mysticism as well. These are very mystical figures in a sort of a classical sense of the word, actually. There's also a relationship to sort of a literary history, or like different images fold into each other. And, you know, that's one of the things that this exhibition wants to explore is, you know, how that language is being built for an artist. And, you know, more often than not, it's an intuitive sort of a process, right? And it's not to dissect and sort of analyze that, but maybe, yeah, exactly as you said, to be that sponge, to feel free to cite and sort of references and build a language of your own through the fracture of sort of images that we live in. When we started speaking about this exhibition thesis, did you feel that that was something that you resonated with in terms of how you build this central figure, how you build this image?
Absolutely. I think I can relate when you talk about multiplicity. In my mind, multiplicity is directly related to freedom and the ability to shift and change and be elusive and be one thing one day and the other thing the other day. And so when we were talking about the exhibition, I felt immediately like there's space for that here. I think with this particular work, it is full of a lot of different things, right? You did say literary. We had a lot of conversations about text and all of that. So I just let it come. It's intuitive. But I do see myself as a pirate in the context of art history, and like taking things that feel like I can take them without apology, and sort of like creating something new with it and regaining a sense of power.
Beautiful. I'm going to end here. What a beautiful ending. Thank you all for sharing your observations and experiences with your work. Melanie, Matthew, Naudline, please give them a warm applause. So we're almost flagging for the finish here, which means that we welcome two artists for the last sort of a panel of this afternoon, which is Hamishi, Farah, and Selma, Selman. We're going to take like a minute to set things up, and then, yeah, see you in a minute. So much for sticking with us. I welcome to our little low stage here Hamishi, Farah, and Selma Selman. Give them a warm applause of welcome. Very exciting that you're here. Your work also is sort of adjacent to each other in the exhibition. So I'm interested to see what sort of affinities also sort of emerge here. But first, let's start to talk about your sort of individual works, of course. Selma, I'm going to begin with you, if that's okay. Your work also exists in many different like fractures and form in this exhibition. It's sort of a body of work, right? It's multiple sort of objects that you have sort of made the work on, but it all revolves around, kind of one figure, Medusa, right? And the eye, sort of that vision and the eye and looking into that eye and the eye looking back at you is really important. Medusa, talk to me.
Thank you, Hendrik. Well, the starting point actually was Venus, because I was like, oh, I'm gonna just like research now, like what is my relationship to Venus, but that I end up like connecting more with Gorgon's sisters and Medusa. But in particular, I was very much interested in danger. What does it mean to be in this dangerous position? But this ambiguity with it, like, is it a dangerous body or is it a body in danger? And this is what I did with this work. Basically, I put myself and I put the audience in this unresolved feeling in a way that I'm not going to tell you this is a finished work, this is what I'm exactly thinking of. It is something that you have to kind of rethink how you're going to see these women, how you're going to see Medusa if she's looking back at you in a way. So, and in my statement, I also say I do not guarantee that something is not going to happen, which means it makes it very much active installation. But usually in my art practice, for me, it's very important that I do question the systems. I work a lot with the transformation. And I remember when we had these conversations of like what I'm gonna do, I was like panicking because once you asked me, Selma, would you consider painting on canvas? You know, and I was like a little bit, hello, like.
Have we met?
Yeah, I mean, like I have a problem with the white surface, with the white color, because like, it's so clean that makes me, I'm not scared of it, it's just a little bit not for me. I like to use found objects because for me they're resisting and they're still kind of active because they also went through something that now they're speaking for themselves. And another thing that I'm very much interested in this, let's say, capitalist world is like how these found objects that you find them basically in the garbage or in my scrapyard that I have or in the places that I cannot even say where I find, you know, and then you put them in such an institution which is like, look at the audience here, you know, who are the people here privileged, right? And then you see something that is coming from underprivileged positions, you know. In regard to that, I'm sorry if I talk a lot. In regard to that, I also want to say that 100 years ago, Roma people were the first one to recycle scrap metal. Living from it means like ecologically and economically. And the white privileged Western society found like collecting and recycling interesting now. And now it's like, yeah, it's great. But 100 years ago, when Roma started it, it was not kind of appreciated. So me bringing these metals back in these institutions, it's like resisting and gaining my power back.
You've made two lines for us already. One is sort of the Medusa line, of course. The second line is the history of the found sort of objects that you sort of paint on. A third line kind of runs in sort of a sequence with that, which is this notion of sort of ancestry. And I want to refer a little bit back to an exhibition that happened in Siep kind of earlier this year, where this Siep is an art space in the north of Holland, run by Anissa Zeko, who sits in the front here. An important exhibition, I think, within your work, because this notion of sort of ancestry, history of the self as well, was kind of unpacked in that exhibition and found its sort of a counterpoint in a license to fabulate and to speculate a lot, which I think has been very instrumental for the making of this work. Do you want to talk a little bit about that exhibition, but very much in light of what it sort of gave to you as an artist?
Yeah, I mean, that project, 600 Years of Migrating Mothers, I would say is one of my most important projects so far. And of course, it influenced a lot on what I'm currently doing and actually going back more into like history and stories, allegories, right? But in a way, creating even a fiction about that. And thinking about all these positions. For example, 600 Years of Migrating Mothers is basically researching I was researching myself, but also my mother, the mother of my mother's mother, mother, and then I went back 600 years ago to think about basically how would the history look like from the female Roma perspective, in a way. And this is, in a way, influenced also this work, which I call, in a way, anti-fragility, because these are the body which are constantly resisting, but they never have one position. It's always like visible, invisible, but also like having many positions or being vulnerable or being dangerous is not really like not having a power. It's indeed opposite. It puts you in this anti-fragility, which means you could exist in a multiple places in a way, which means also that my Medusa, in a way, it's constantly provoking, but she's also just like there, standing and like doing whatever. But then this work, 600 Years of Migrating Mothers, it's like ongoing. There is no end. But the same with Medusa, you know, like it's work in emotion. It's constantly resisting, looking back at you.
Medusa as this different sort of angel of like a history almost somehow, is this how I've also started to think a little bit about it. But this word, sort of ancestry, has a sister word, which is lineage of sort of images. And Hamishi and that word are making a way to your work that you have made for this exhibition. Because a conversation that we've had revolved a lot around how do sort of images sort of arrive to us at this moment in time, and through which sort of iconography, actually. Could you maybe introduce your work a little bit through the lens of those two words?
Sorry, what were the two words?
Iconography and lineage.
Iconography and lineage. Thank you. Yeah. I think maybe another way of thinking about iconography and lineage could also be thinking through or thinking about the symbolic order and the sets of laws and rules that we enter into by participating in language and society. And I think that there are meanings that have been entrenched or encoded into images and language without directly being able to speak it or pull it apart. So I think you wanted me to introduce the work? So the work is a painting of the 20th century, I mean actually she just died quite recently, British primatologist Jane Goodall. She's holding two chimpanzees in a somewhat nurturing kind of form. It evokes maybe images of the Madonna with Christ and St. John the Baptist as a baby. I'm kind of interested in that particular triad. It's an apocryphal form, with meaning that theologically St. John the Baptist came much later. They didn't know each other as babies. They weren't playing with each other as babies, unlike a lot of the images that were developed in Florentine Renaissance would depict. And I think that in terms of a technology of images, in terms of lineage and what was the other word?
Iconography, sorry?
Iconography. I think it's like technologically quite interesting because the inclusion of St. John the Baptist as a baby exists to kind of, not necessarily to foreshadow the sacrifice or foreshadow then even after the salvation of the believers of Christ, but the possibility of martyrdom is rendered into the flesh of this young little child by including him with the two others. And I guess the ways in which that maybe relates to it's quite evident, I guess, how that relates to the symbolic order or how we construct how we're able to read a family or an image, but I guess I kind of want to leave some of that open, yeah.
No, totally. But I mean, of course, also how sort of the repetition of sort of images over time, over centuries, actually, within, to use your sort of a specific example, within sort of a European sort of art history anchored in sort of the Renaissance time, how that repetition of sort of image forms symbolic order, forms frameworks, very much also actually speaks to your work in many different ways, how sort of the Medusa figure actually has also become shaped over time as sort of a sort of nightmare, or sort of the patriarchal nightmare in sense, right? You look into her eyes and you turn into stone. It's the fear of men in so many ways, right? And how in your work you take that image as much as you take that, your image as this sort of Virgin Mary with the sort of children, and you kind of sort of twist it slightly and you make it into something else. So maybe to turn that into a sort of a question, like, what are you turning Medusa into?
Yeah. Well, there is this terminology that is called undeading, which is basically something that Michel Foucault wrote about, micropolitics. It is the bodies that are constantly in the process of dying, but they never die. And I think this is basically the position of Medusa. Medusa, even to this day, right? Like her story, her allegory still coexist, right, with us. Even without, the body, only the head still is a dangerous body. But as I said, also the body in danger. So this is something that for me was the most interesting part when I was thinking about Medusa and how do I relate to her. Also Gorgon's sisters, somehow like, in a way, like, yeah, it is very personal, but at the same time it becomes like kind of universal because it is the story of her stories, everyone's story. It does not belong to me. But then like I was thinking of my own kind of history and my sisters, and maybe they're Gorgons and I'm Medusa. So I'm mortal. So yeah, but yeah, that's like, but it's also the title, Don't Look Into Our Eyes. It's something that I've been thinking for a while, because how can the stereotype, right, let's say of the Roma women, that she's a little bit too dangerous, provocative, too dirty, how do you use a stereotype? Do not say opposite, but kind of resist through it by not claiming you are not, but putting people in a position, what if it is? So this is the positions that I was interested in, like, and how even the painting, I mean, my paintings are always between sculpture and painting, which becomes anti-fragile in a way. And even if there would be a fire, I hope not, my paintings would survive, So
this is good to know.
Paintings on canvas, not sure, but yeah.
Sorry for everyone else, but yes.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, and then so for me, that's it.
Totally. Hamishi, I know this kind of like notion of repetition of image, and also a potential violence that is sort of repeated in them has been sort of the topic of sort of the dialogue between us. There is what's the right word here? There is something, when I stand in front of your work, there's something really unsettling, actually, in looking at that image, because it's so hyper realistic, it kind of like comes out at me in a certain way. So there is a relationship to kind of the hyper-real as almost sort of a strategy of sort of destabilizing a sort of images. I'm reading a little bit into it now. Maybe it's a reading that you not recognize yourself in at all, but I'm sort of curious, this kind of like hyper-real, what it can do to sort of the destabilization of an image when we talk about this repetition and violence, etc., etc.
That's an interesting question. I didn't think about that. But I don't really make any new images. The picture of her with the chimpanzees is from an interview in the 90s, and I think that in talking about the symbolic order and how images are read, I'm kind of, I don't think it's a particularly necessarily a violent image in and of itself. She looks quite sweet. She looks quite serene. These monkeys look well cared for, and I think, and she, top amazing woman. This is like a pretty significant 20th century figure. This is like the white woman Michael Jackson kind of. So. I don't want to interfere with that so much, and I think that maybe in painting, I'm not going to say that there's not an attentiveness to form in the work, but I guess I don't want so much of my decision making to get in the way of how potential antagonisms and violences erupt out of an audience's experience with the subject matter. And I think that maybe by giving more on the surface, it gives things to interrupt the relationship between the audience and the subject.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sort of collecting my thoughts for a second after that response. I want to, because, sorry, I have to share like sort of another observation because I find it so interesting, sort of the relationship between your two works somehow, but also how they sort of differ quite extremely in how they sort of present themselves to sort of an audience. There is sort of a uniformity in that sort of image that you make that is immediately sort of recognizable, and that tries to have that sort of immediacy as a way perhaps to sort of unsettle and point to other things. Okay, we could talk about that. But there's an extreme fracture in yours, actually, where these eyes that look at us are literally spread across this sort of exhibition. There's sort of the wheel rims at the end of the show, and then even the sort of presentation around sort of the satellite dish holding sort of the Medusa as like a central figure is sort of fragmented in these other eyes. That kind of sort of dissemination, sort of fragmentation, how did you sort of arrive at that sort of choice to not make a work that speaks in a singularity?
Yeah, because I realized that I needed to experiment a little bit more, and one portrait was not kind of enough, because having like a few more objects would kind of have my story of Medusa kind of complete in a way. And I usually in my practice, that's how I build my installation, by fragmenting other parts of metal or found objects. So, and when I don't paint on the car hoods, this is the objects that I use, and somehow even this satellite dish that I actually bought in, where I got it from, somewhere in Germany, right? Yeah, scrapyard Germany. And then all other parts I found around Berlin, in scrapyard. And as I said, I really, I see the objects and then I fall in love with them, and I was like, I need to do something with this, right? And then you see, this could actually potentially work. So this is how I create this installation.
Yeah. Just have a really short sort of practical sort of a question, which goes a little bit into sort of the display again, because we had actually a long chat about the wall that is behind your work, and still you were quite sort of insistent in a way that the work should still have a wall. Why?
Because when you see the satellite dish, it's kind of, its purpose is to replicate the shield, like the shield that Caravaggio had, right? And I just needed this shield to actually have its own shield. Without it, I think it would kind of, I don't know, it wouldn't work. You know, even though, like, yeah, in a way, if it could stay alone in the space, yes, but in this case I really needed this wall to kind of create another protection layer, which kind of beautifully works also with the work that is just there, you know, so you create these double layers installation.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I mean, that wall, even though it's sort of curved, and you've said yourself, you have such a sculptural sort of approach to, let's say, sort of the painting medium, but the wall kind of allows it to still sort of relate to that history in many ways. So I thought it was actually really wonderful.
Oh, you
sort
said
of
that
choice.
Beautifully.
Yeah.
Cool.
And in that sense, I'm gonna just make one more sort of a jump here, because I think that's ultimately, you know, what I see as one of the main anchors of your sort of project as well, is to understand, you know, how images work, I think, and how images have a history of their own, of course, whatever that history may be, but also to capture that kind of image history in the specific medium to sort of paint. And as a conceptual artist who sort of paints, and I say this with some sort of emphasis, what does sort of that medium allow you to do?
Well, I think paintings are obviously really expensive, and I think that that's kind of important in a way, not just to, like, you know, subsist, but also to differentiate one image from another. I also think that you're saying, what does painting in particular allow me to do?
Why do you paint?
Why do I paint? Yeah. No, I think it's useful, you know, because I think painting's really kind of, you know, quite like a messy topic. I'm sure that this has been the subject of a lot of conversations today. But the way that I think about how we aggregate or deal with the linearity of art history would be a kind of sublimating whatever the dominant forms of value are in each kind of time period, you know. So, and I think that that's often quite easily tracked through painting. So, you know, when you think about, you know, after the Enlightenment, before the French Revolution, when you think about the kinds of images that we see, it depicts possessions, whether that's land, livestock, banquets, merchants, and a kind of wealth that is passed down, you know, through family, and that's the kind of function of portraiture. And I think at the point at which, sorry, I'm talking for a bit long in response to that, but sorry. But I think you know, at the point of the French Revolution, the bourgeoisie seek to create a culture of taste that distinguishes themselves from the previous aristocracy, and in, you know, these fashions of Japanese woodblock printing, the world opening up, and their money that was made through the pillaging of islands, Africa, indigenous populations, the way in which the form of the European image shifted, it followed a flattening that mirrored a kind of value where that was produced through taking something from outside and reproducing that. And these were the same people who owned the salons and the cafes that were frequented. These were the donors. So the kinds of pictures that were able to be made history of were were reproducing the version of value in which they're able to experience, you know. And I think to some degree, going back to painting being worth money and being expensive, I do think that there is something that counts in our relationship to art in that sense. Otherwise there wouldn't be a fundraising department, you know, like it would be a different relationship to images. So I'm just going to try and squeeze that response much shorter because I realize I'm talking a little bit too much.
Wonderful. Please, Selma.
Yeah, I just want to say that, like, even today, like when we have AI and technology, you can see how like painters in painting is still very actual, and it's kind of resisting in today's world. And for me, I think as a painter, right, I was always, the painting is like the only form which directly can be judged, criticized, because it can be judged by your skills, it can be judged by the size, whatever. And because I did finish academy in Bosnia under the professor who was first like a soldier, then became an artist. Like I needed to know everything in terms of art. You know, if you don't know why do you make art, it's very dangerous. You know, but at the same time, we were always in a fear of creating kitsch, and I think you know, like painting has this potential that kitsch can be very much easily visible, where other form like performance or a video, it's really hard. Actually, kitsch is welcomed, you know, but where in the paintings, it's actually very dangerous. And I quote Yusuf Hajifezovic, amazing artist from Sarajevo, who says, "From kitsch to blood is just one step," you know, and this is where I wouldn't say artists have to be careful, you just have to be aware. On another note, when we talk about figurative painting and abstract painting, actually, why do collectors buy more abstract? Figurative painting is mostly for collections, big collection, people who can see, understand. Art, which is not, how would I say, which does not need a lot of explanations, is bought by, you know, 1% of people, you know, because being abstract painter gives you this possibility that you don't have to say much, and people who don't know much can own this painting, you know? I'm not judging, I'm just saying.
No, but I mean, both of you have brought us into a conversation on value, which is, you know, just of course a word that sort of branches out in all the sort of pathways that you've already mentioned, but it did play a role in sort of the conversation about this sort of architecture that we had within this show as well, because the sort of architects, you know, they really made a choice to put these works, and myself too, of course, to put these works on seemingly, but also actually, sort of a cheap background, sort of the cardboard that these walls are made of.
It looks so nice, though. It looks so
really good. That's what I was going for. It's going to look good. But we also made a choice for an anti-monumentality there, you know, and I really sort of questioned sort of the choice, because on the one hand, I didn't want to sort of deny sort of the painting's history as a bourgeois and as sort of a palatial object, and how it has existed sort of art historically with its sort of associations with value in every type of way, sort of financially, sort of intellectually, sort of exclusive value, etc., etc. And on the one hand, I wanted to give sort of a counterweight to how painting, especially figurative, has in the last sort of decade been sort of presented very explicitly as an object of value again, you know. And so to build maybe a different, realer, for me at least, more real sort of a relationship to what this art form can do right now. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of maybe like elevate that for like a second, that these walls kind of like do something that I can't quite put my finger on.
I think I think that it's really timely in a way, you know. I mean, like the exhibition design and the fact that it's on these walls, the fact that the show is shaped this way. You know, I think I'm 35. Yeah. I'm not bragging. No, but as I came into art, it was displayed. You know, I'm from Australia. It's very far away from here, and the way in which I would consume a lot of art was on the internet. You know, and I think that there was a kind of sine qua non of like how images of art should look at a certain point. That, you know, this kind of contemporary art daily and kind of documented and packaged so people can also, there's a kind, it mirrors a kind of borderlessness of the Biennale, of everyone in each different country looking at the works and observing them. And I think that the forms that took end up kind of replicating almost like Google Images, you know, with the white background and everything being able to float, you know. And I think that like maybe there's something timely about this particular show because it demands someone actually inhabit it. You know, you can't really encounter the show by flicking through highlights of the works. And I guess maybe I'm wondering if that was a particular concern or thought of yours when you were working on it or putting it together.
Absolutely. I mean, I can just answer very sort of quickly and say yes, because sort of a painting, I think, and many art forms, and something that, I mean, I do myself as well, of course, but they kind of, you know, live in a very Instagram-ready world at the moment. I mean, they're utterly sort of consumable in sort of an immediate way, and image have the power to lose, image run the risk of losing sort of the power that they have immediately, almost somehow, even though the sort of intent is to do the sort of opposite. So that was one impulse to sort of produce a space, exactly as you say, to sort of inhabit and be with in like a different way, but also a space that does that in sort of a performative manner almost. I mean, you're also seeing that a lot of the works are not installed in the center of walls. They actually like seek the edge of the walls, you know. They sort of create a movement in space so that they turn with you and you turn with them somehow. So yeah, the desire to create a different space for what's happening in this art form at this moment in time was the leading sort of a question somehow. But you're fighting centuries of art history at the same time, when it comes to value, when it comes to figuration, when it comes to sort of allegory. I mean, fighting is too strong a word because there's also aspects of it that I really love, of course. But yeah, to make this different space, absolutely. Selma, I know you had something on your mind earlier as well.
Yeah, I wanted to say what I like about the show, and I think it's really amazingly curated, because it's against tradition. You know, there's no white walls because paintings, require white wall, and it is doing everything opposite, which is amazing. And even though there's 29 works, you have the feeling that the entire exhibition is like one organ. Right? And you constantly wait that something is going to happen. And also the architectures, Forma Fantasma, I think that they did a great job with choosing this material, which I said is not traditional, but it gives something very, how would I say, fragile, like something else is gonna happen. It looks like a mock-up map. Maybe it relates to the history, like maybe the histories are never like unfinished in a way, and this is what for me the show kind of gives, which I think it's amazing. And and thank you so much for having us in this show. So
I appreciate you both for sharing observations and experiences with your work and how you're making. That has certainly been the main inspiration for me and all of us making this exhibition. So Hamishi and Selma, I thank you. Give them a very warm applause, please. This brings us at the beginning of a journey that will last 3.5 months with this exhibition. I hope you come and see it many times. I hope that you will get the book if you don't have it already. I hope that you come to Zurich next year to see the sort of evolution of this sort of exhibition, because it is a thing that I very much hope will remain alive. I thank you all for spending a holiday Thursday morning and afternoon with us.